She had exactly $11 in her pocket, a bruise forming along her jaw she hadn't told anyone about, and nowhere left on earth to go. Most people, when they hit rock bottom, look up. Lena Brooks looked sideways, toward the one lit window in the one house she'd avoided for 3 years, the home of a man wealthy enough to buy her silence and powerful enough to ruin what little she had left. She knocked anyway. What happened behind that door would change both their lives in ways neither of them could have survived alone. If this story reaches you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Hit like, stay until the end. You won't regret it. The storm had been building since noon. By 10 o'clock that Tuesday night in October, it had turned into something ugly and personal. The kind of rain that didn't just fall but attacked, driving sideways off the Connecticut hills and hammering every surface with a sound like gravel thrown against glass. The oak trees lining Whitmore Lane bent at angles that made you nervous. Gutters overflowed, puddles became rivers, and the whole neighborhood of Ashford Heights sat dark and locked behind its iron gates and tasteful landscaping, every porch light off, every sensible, wealthy family already asleep or pretending to be, every house except one. Number 14. Whitmore Lane still had its kitchen light burning at 11:47 p.m. A warm amber rectangle visible from the road, steady against the storm. Inside that light, Grant Holloway was doing something his CFO would have called a waste of his time, and something his mother would have called a miracle. He was washing dishes by hand. He had a dishwasher. He had, technically, a woman named Mrs. Ortiz who came 3 mornings a week and would have happily taken care of every dirty dish in the house. But Grant had developed the habit after Sophie was born, 4 years ago now, of doing the last dishes of the night himself alone after his daughter was asleep. It was the one part of the day when his brain finally slowed down enough to let him breathe. He scrubbed a pasta pot and stared out the window above the sink at nothing but rain and darkness. 32 years old. Net worth somewhere north of $300 million, depending on the quarter. Owner of Holloway Strategic Partners, a private equity firm that had quietly swallowed 4 companies in the last 18 months and made significant noise in financial circles that Grant paid very little attention to personally. His picture had appeared twice on the cover of regional business magazines. His lawyers sent him quarterly updates on his estate planning. His assistant Priya managed his calendar with the precision of a Swiss movement. And tonight, like most nights, he was alone in his kitchen at midnight, washing a pasta pot and listening to rain. He wasn't miserable. He'd given up miserable about 2 years ago when he realized it was a luxury he couldn't afford with a toddler depending on him. He was something harder to name, a man who had arranged his life into something functional and sustainable and reasonably good, and who had quietly packed away the part of himself that wanted more than that. The pot was clean. He set it in the drying rack and reached for a glass. That's when he heard it. Not thunder, not a branch giving way to the wind. A knock, soft, almost uncertain, like whoever was on the other side of that front door wasn't fully committed to being there. Grant turned off the faucet. Silence, except for rain. Then again. 3 knocks, deliberate this time. He dried his hands on the dish towel and moved through the hallway, passing the framed photo of Sophie on her first birthday that he still hadn't straightened despite telling himself every day to fix it. He checked the security panel near the door. The camera feed showed a figure on his porch, hunched against the rain, holding a bag that was clearly not waterproof anymore. He couldn't make out the face clearly, too dark, too much rain coming down. He opened the door. Lena Brooks looked like she'd been put through a dryer on the wrong setting. Her dark hair was plastered flat against her skull. Her jacket, a gray canvas thing, not designed for this kind of weather, was soaked through entirely, dark patches spreading across her shoulders and back. The travel bag she clutched against her hip had turned from whatever color it started as into a darker, sadder version of itself. One of the zipper pulls was broken, held shut with a hair tie. She was shaking. Not from cold alone, Grant could see that. There was something deeper running through her, some internal tremor she was working hard to keep contained, and she had a bruise, just below her left cheekbone, 3 days old maybe. Fading yellow-green at the edges, still darker in the center. Their eyes met. She looked like she was deciding, even now, whether to stay or bolt. "Lena," Grant said. It came out quieter than he intended. "What happened to you?" She exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and some of the rigidity went out of her shoulders. like she'd been holding herself together with nothing but tension and forward momentum, and his saying her name had temporarily removed the need for it. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was rough, not emotional, just raw, like she'd used it too much or not enough over the past few days. "I know it's late. I know how this looks." "Get inside," he said. "Grant, it's 40 degrees and you're wet. Get inside." He stepped back from the doorway, leaving space for her to come through. Not pulling her in, just making room. She came in. He got her a towel before anything else. Then another one when the first proved inadequate. He found a wool blanket from the hall closet, the good one, the thick navy blue one his sister had bought him as a housewarming gift 2 years ago, and handed it over without ceremony. Lena sat at his kitchen table wrapped in the blanket, her wet jacket draped over the back of a chair, and held a mug of tea that Grant had made without asking what she wanted. He figured something hot beat nothing hot. He sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. "The bruise," he finally said, not accusing, just asking. She touched her face automatically, then stopped herself. "It's not what you're probably thinking." "I'm not thinking anything. I'm asking." She looked at him for a moment, reading something in his face. Then she wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. "Marcus, my ex-landlord's son. I was 3 weeks behind on rent. He came by to collect. I told him I needed more time, and he—" She stopped. "He didn't hit me, exactly. More like he shoved me into a doorframe on his way out. But the result looked the same." Grant's jaw tightened. He kept his face neutral with some effort. "Did you report it? To who?" There was no bitterness in how she said it, just a flat, factual question. He didn't have a good answer for that. "They evicted me the next day," she continued. "Technically, I owe them 2 months, so—" She shrugged. One shoulder, the right one, the universal gesture for what can you do. "I stayed at Priya Chen's place for 4 days. Not Priya, your assistant, different Priya, my friend from culinary school. But she has a studio, and her boyfriend basically lives there, and I could see it was— I couldn't keep—" She stopped again, pressed her lips together. "I called Dina, who I've known since we were 15. She said she'd ask her husband. 3 days went by. She never called back." Grant watched her. He noticed she wasn't crying. She looked like someone who had moved past the stage where crying was available to them and had arrived at something drier and harder. "So here you are," he said. "So here I am." She met his eyes over the rim of the mug. "I almost didn't come. I sat in my car down the street for 45 minutes. "You have a car?" "I had a car. I left it at Priya's because I couldn't afford the insurance. I took a bus to the main road and walked from there." She paused. "In the rain." He absorbed this. "Lena, why me?" It was the right question, and they both knew it. They weren't close, exactly. They'd known each other through circumstance. She had worked briefly as a private chef for an event his company hosted 18 months ago, and they'd talked more than the situation required and exchanged numbers afterward. They'd texted a handful of times. Met for coffee once, 6 months ago, that had gone well and turned into 3 hours without either of them noticing. But they weren't. He didn't know what they were. Something unclassified. She set the mug down on the table. "Because you're the only person I know who I don't think would use this against me." She said it simply, without flattery, like she was reporting a fact. "Everyone else who might have helped, there's always a cost. A favor owed, or they'd tell other people, or they'd look at me differently afterward. You're—" She paused, choosing. "You're safe. I know that sounds strange to say about someone I barely know." Grant looked at her. The blanket was slightly too big and had slid off one shoulder. There was a smear of dried mud on the side of her sneaker. She was looking back at him with an expression that was proud and exhausted in equal measure. Someone who had asked for help and hated every second of the asking. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" The guest room's upstairs, second door on the left. Bathrooms across the hall. There should be everything you need. I'll find some dry clothes. They'll be too big, but— He stood up. "You should sleep." She stared at him. "You're not going to ask questions. I'll ask tomorrow." He picked up her mug and carried it to the sink. "Tonight you need dry clothes in about 8 hours. Grant," he turned. "Thank you." The 2 words cost her something. He could see it. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's a room. Go to bed." He lay awake until 2 in the morning. This wasn't unusual for Grant. His brain did not believe in clean shutoffs. But tonight the insomnia had a different texture, not the familiar loop of deal structures and quarterly projections and the background noise of managing a business. Tonight he was thinking about a woman asleep in his guest room and the particular quality of pride it takes to knock on someone's door in the rain. He'd known people his entire life who could have used help and didn't ask. His own father, who ran a hardware store in Providence for 30 years and would have sooner sold a kidney than admitted to anyone that the business was struggling. Grant had learned early that the people who most needed a hand were often the ones least willing to extend theirs, because asking cost something real, a piece of your self-conception, a vulnerability you couldn't take back. Lena had knocked anyway. He thought about the bruise, the door frame, the landlord's son who'd shoved a woman half his size because he could and then filed the paperwork anyway. He thought about Deanna, who'd said she'd ask her husband and then said nothing for 3 days while her friend slept on a studio floor. He turned over in bed and looked at the ceiling. He thought about Melissa. He always eventually thought about Melissa. 3 years ago. They'd been engaged for 7 months when she came home with a look on her face he'd never seen before and sat across the kitchen table from him and said, very carefully, that she didn't think she could do this. This being Sophie specifically, not Grant, she was quick to say. Not Grant as a person, just Grant as a package deal. The baby, the responsibility, the way he'd been up every night for 4 months and wasn't the same version of himself anymore. She wasn't wrong. He hadn't been the same version of himself. He'd become someone more tired and more careful and more present than he'd ever been. And apparently that version of him wasn't the one she'd agreed to marry. The engagement ended. She moved to San Francisco. Sophie turned 1. Grant hired Mrs. Ortiz and bought this house and built the life he had now, which was quiet and good and missing something he'd stopped naming. He fell asleep somewhere past 2, finally, to the sound of rain easing off outside. Sophie found Lena first. This was inevitable. Sophie Holloway woke at 6:15 every morning with the alarming certainty of a 4-year-old who had somewhere to be, and she padded through the house in her fleece rabbit pajamas, investigating everything with a focus that Grant privately found terrifying and occasionally hilarious. He heard the bedroom door, he heard small feet on the stairs, he heard the kitchen, the familiar sounds of Sophie locating the stool she used to reach the counter, the cabinet where the cereal lived. Then he heard her stop. Then he heard, in a 4-year-old's completely volume-unregulated voice, "Why is there a lady on the couch?" Grant was out of bed before his eyes were fully open. He found Lena sitting up on the living room couch. She must have migrated there sometime in the night, or maybe she'd never made it upstairs, blinking at a small girl in rabbit pajamas who was standing 3 feet away holding a box of Cheerios and staring at her with the pure, weaponized curiosity of a child who had never learned that staring was impolite. "Hi," Lena said. Her voice was morning rough, her hair in every direction, a crease from the couch cushion across her cheek. She looked, Grant thought, startlingly normal. Not like someone auditioning for sympathy, just a person who'd slept somewhere unfamiliar. "Hi," said Sophie. She examined Lena with great seriousness. "What's your name?" "Lena." "That's a short name." "It is. What's yours?" "Sophie Marie Holloway." Sophie said this the way she always did, full name like she was submitting documentation. "The middle name is for my grandma. She's in Florida." "That's a longer name." "I know." Sophie held out the Cheerios box. "Do you want some? Daddy usually pours them, but I can pour them myself if I'm careful." Grant appeared in the doorway. Sophie turned to look at him with an expression of complete innocence. "Daddy, there's a Lena." "I see that." He looked at Lena. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that wasn't quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "Good morning." "Morning." She brushed her hair out of her face. "I ended up down here. Felt weird being upstairs." "Okay." "Daddy, can Lena have breakfast with us?" Grant looked at his daughter, then at Lena. "That's up to Lena." Lena looked at Sophie, who was still holding out the Cheerios with the patient generosity of someone who had made a genuine offer and intended to stand by it. "Yeah," Lena said. "I'd like that." She stayed 3 days. That was the original arrangement. Or rather, Grant had made no arrangement at all that first night, and by morning the implied situation was that she'd get herself sorted and move on within a few days, and Lena operated under that assumption with a brisk determination that Grant found both admirable and mildly exhausting to watch. She spent the first morning on her phone, making calls, sending emails, checking listings, working through a list with the methodical focus of someone who is treating disaster like a project. Grant gave her space. He took Sophie to preschool, answered emails himself from his home office, let her have the kitchen table as a workspace. By noon, she had surfaced looking less brisk and more like someone who'd run their car into a wall at moderate speed. "The job market for private chefs right now," she said, sitting across from him with a cup of coffee he'd made her while she wasn't paying attention, "is not great. What are you finding?" 3 open positions in the metro area. One is a 2-month contract, one pays about 60% of what I was making 2 years ago, and one wants someone with their own vehicle for transportation. She paused. "Which I don't have." Grant looked at his laptop screen, thought for a moment, then looked back at her. "What about catering? Not as a chef. Events coordinator, assistant. I have no experience with that side of it. You ran the kitchen for Meridian Group's spring event 18 months ago. That event had 240 guests, 3 dietary category variations, and a timeline problem when the AV team ran 40 minutes long and you restructured the service sequence on the fly." He said it matter-of-factly. "That's coordination experience." She stared at him. "You remember that?" "I was at the event." He shrugged. "And I talked to the events director afterward. She said you were the reason the second half of that dinner worked." A silence opened between them, not uncomfortable. More like she was recalibrating something. "You never told me that," she said. "It didn't come up." He closed his laptop. "Point is, there's transferable experience there that you might be underselling yourself on." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled her phone back toward her. "I'll look at a different set of listings." What? The second day he came home from the office at 3:15 because Sophie's preschool called about a slight fever and he needed to pick her up early. He expected to come home to the sounds of Lana on the phone, the background industry of someone working through a problem. Instead, he walked into his kitchen and smelled garlic and something braised, and found Lena at his stove with Sophie on the stool beside her, both of them wearing dish towels tucked into their collars as improvised aprons, Sophie very seriously stirring something in a small bowl. "Daddy, I'm cooking," Sophie announced without looking up from her bowl, with the gravity of someone who should not be interrupted. "I can see that." He set his keys on the counter, looked at Lena. "Fever's gone. She was fine the moment I picked her up." Lena turned from the stove. She had a dish towel over her shoulder and flour on her forearm from something earlier in the process. "Classic. She told me she wanted to make chicken. I had some time, so..." She gestured at the stove. "I found your fridge situation." "My fridge situation. The chicken thighs that needed to be used, the half bottle of white wine, the thyme, the vegetables that were about a day from being compost." She turned back to the stove. "It'll be ready in about 30 minutes. Grant put his bag down and stood in the middle of his kitchen for a moment. His daughter was stirring a bowl of something with her tongue poking out the side of her mouth in concentration. The windows were fogged slightly with steam. His kitchen smelled like a real meal was happening in it, which it did approximately twice a week when he managed to cook something that wasn't pasta or eggs. He felt something crack open in his chest, small, like a hairline fracture, nothing dramatic. "Can I help?" he said. Lena looked over her shoulder. She seemed surprised, like she'd expected him to go to his office. "You can cut those potatoes," she said, nodding at the counter. "Quarter-inch pieces, the knife's already out." He rolled up his sleeves. Sophie looked up from her bowl. "Daddy is helping," she reported to Lena. "He's not very good at cutting, but he's careful." "That's a fair assessment," Grant said. Lena laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. Genuinely, not politely. And it was a little louder than he expected and thoroughly unself-conscious, and it changed her face completely. He cut the potatoes, carefully. The third night, Sophie was in bed and it was nearly 10 o'clock, and they were sitting on his back porch under the overhang, the rain from 3 nights ago replaced now by clear cold air and a sky that had decided to cooperate for once, stars visible through the bare tree branches. Grant had brought out 2 bottles of beer. He'd set one in front of Lena without asking, and she'd picked it up without comment. They'd been talking for almost 2 hours, not about jobs or plans or the practical machinery of her situation, about other things, the way conversations sometimes drift when the time is right and 2 people stop performing for each other. She'd told him about growing up in Bridgeport, her mother who worked double shifts and still made dinner every Sunday, the culinary school scholarship she'd won at 22 that felt like the floor opening into something better, He'd told her, slowly, like he was remembering something he'd buried, about his father's hardware store. The smell of it. How he'd spent every Saturday there from age 6 to 16, stocking shelves and listening to his father talk to customers about things that needed fixing. How he'd gone into finance and made more money in 1 year at 28 than his father made in a decade, and how that had never felt entirely like a success in the way people assumed. He was proud of you, Lena said. It wasn't a question. He was. Grant turned the beer bottle in his hands. He also thought private equity was, he said once, it's a funny kind of job where you make a lot of money and nobody you help ever meets you. He paused. He wasn't wrong. Do you think about doing something different? I think about it. He looked out at the dark yard. Sophie changes things. The calculus of risk is different when someone depends on you. You get careful in ways you didn't expect. How old is she when she starts resenting the caution? He looked at Lena. She looked back. Something in her expression was direct and a little challenging, without being unkind. I don't know, he said honestly. That's a better answer than I expected. What answer did you expect? Something about providing for her. Security? Something that sounds right. He considered this. I think about it, he said again, which was a different admission than before. She nodded, took a drink, looked up at the sky. I had a plan, she said after a moment. When I was 24, full, detailed, very earnest plan. My own restaurant. Something small, maybe 40 seats, neighborhood place, good food, not trying to be anything except what it was. She paused. Not a groundbreaking vision, just real. What happened to it? Life, mostly. Money, specifically. I kept doing the practical thing, the private clients, the events work, the income that was reliable enough to get by on, but not enough to save toward anything. And then the relationship that took 4 years and left me nothing except a very detailed understanding of how someone can make you feel stupid for having ambitions. She stopped. And then 1 year became 2, and 2 became 5, and here I am at 30 with nowhere to sleep. Grant was quiet for a moment. The plan isn't dead. It's a long way from alive. That's different from dead. She looked at him. You're an optimist. I'm a realist who's seen enough turnarounds to know the difference between a problem and a terminal situation. He held her gaze. This isn't terminal, Lena. You're 30, and you're talented, and you have a bad stretch behind you. That's not the same thing as it being over. She was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet where something is happening inside someone that they're not ready to say out loud. I'm going to stay a little longer, she said finally, if that's still okay. I already changed the towels in the guest room. She laughed again, that real laugh. You could have led with that. You needed to arrive at it yourself. She looked at him sideways. He was looking out at the yard again, turning the bottle in his hands. She studied his profile for a moment, the set of his jaw, the slight tension he always carried in his shoulders that probably never fully went away. Why are you alone? She asked. The directness surprised even her, she could tell. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Bad timing, he said finally, followed by bad choices, followed by getting used to it. Getting used to it isn't the same as wanting it. No, he agreed. It's not. The stars moved the way stars do, which is to say they didn't move at all, and yet the whole sky seemed to be slowly wheeling overhead. I'm going to bed, Lena said, standing. She picked up her beer bottle. Thank you, again. I know you told me not to say that. You can say it once a day, he said. After that, it starts sounding like a habit. She smiled at that. It was different from the laugh. Quieter, more personal. Good night, Grant. Good night. He sat outside another 20 minutes after she went in, alone with the cold and the stars and the unfamiliar feeling of having told someone something true. She stayed, not because he asked, not because either of them said anything to formalize it, more because 3 days became a week, and the week became 2, and during that time she found a part-time catering coordination job that paid enough to matter, and Sophie had developed a complete and irrational attachment to her that made every morning feel like Lena's presence was simply the established fact of their household. Grant watched it happen the way you watch weather patterns change, gradual enough that you can't name the exact moment, but unmistakable in hindsight. She had her routines now. She made coffee before he was up in the mornings, always had his ready when he came downstairs. He'd started leaving the porch light on for her when she had late catering shifts. Sophie had claimed 3 of Lena's hair ties as personal property and kept them in her toy box. Lena's copy of the Flavor Bible had found a permanent shelf in Grant's kitchen between his 2 cooking shows he never used. Small things. Gravity works through small things. There were harder moments, too. Nights when Lena got quiet in a particular way that meant she was thinking about something she wasn't sharing, and Grant learned to leave that space open without pushing. Mornings when he left for work with a particular tension in his jaw that meant the business was weighing on him, and she learned to make the coffee stronger and not ask. They existed around each other's difficult edges, the way people do when they've stopped performing and started just inhabiting the same space honestly. One evening, Sophie in bed, 3 weeks in, Grant found Lena at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in handwriting, columns of numbers, a sketch that looked like a floor plan. "What's this?" he said, looking over her shoulder. She covered the pad with her arm reflexively, then seemed to change her mind and moved her arm. "Nothing, just... I was thinking. Numbers don't work, it's just thinking." He sat down and looked at the pad. The sketch was a room, roughly 40 by 30. Tables marked with small circles, a bar counter along one wall, kitchen marked at the back. Along the top, she'd written in her small, slightly left-leaning handwriting, 40 seats, neighborhood, real. He looked at the numbers, looked at the sketch, looked at Lena, who was watching him with an expression that was equal parts defiant and afraid. "You need a better understanding of commercial lease structures in Connecticut," he said. She stared at him. "The numbers here are using retail estimates. Commercial restaurant space has different terms, and there are variables you haven't accounted for." He pulled the pad toward him, not roughly, more like he was claiming his seat at a conversation she'd been having alone. "But the concept math isn't as far off as you probably think." "Grant, I'm not offering anything," he said quickly, because he could see her armor going up. "I'm not saying anything except that the concept is sound, and you've been more conservative than you needed to be in some of these projections." He tapped the paper. "That's all." She looked at the pad, then at him. "You think it could work?" she said. Not a question, more like she was trying the idea on, seeing if it fit. "I think a lot of things could work if the execution is right. Whether this works depends on variables I can't know." He slid the pad back to her side of the table. "But I don't think it's crazy, if that's what you're asking." She looked down at the 40-seat floor plan she'd drawn by hand on a legal pad on a Wednesday night, at a kitchen table that wasn't hers. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I know. I'm just saying it clearly." "I know, Lena." She picked up the pen and made a note in the margin. Her hand was steady. He got up and made 2 cups of tea and brought them back to the table, and they sat there for the next hour while she talked through her numbers, and he occasionally asked questions that made her rethink a line item, and the kitchen light burned steadily, and outside the October night was cold and clear. His daughter was asleep upstairs. The woman at his table was dreaming on paper, and something in Grant Holloway's carefully organized chest, in the place where he'd gotten very good at not wanting things, was quietly and irrevocably shifting. But he didn't tell anyone, not Priya, his assistant, who noticed the improved quality of the lunches he brought into the office and raised one eyebrow but said nothing. Not his sister Donna in Boston, who called every 2 weeks and would have had 17 follow-up questions. Not his business partner Marcus Webb, who was the person he was most honest with professionally and least honest with personally. He didn't tell anyone because there was nothing to tell. That was true. He held it up against the light. What exactly was there to tell? He'd let a friend in out of the rain. She was staying in his guest room. They had conversations and shared meals, and his daughter liked her. That was all. He went over this most nights before he fell asleep, and most nights it satisfied him. And some nights it didn't satisfy him at all, and he lay there in the specific discomfort of knowing something about yourself that you haven't decided what to do with yet. 3 weeks and 2 days after Lena arrived, he was in a meeting with Webb and 2 lawyers from a prospective acquisition target when his phone buzzed with a text from her. Sophie lost a tooth. First one, she's absolutely beside herself. I told her you'd do the tooth fairy thing tonight, and she started explaining to me how it works in extreme detail, in case I didn't know. He was looking at a slide deck about EBITDA margins. He read the text twice. He typed back, "How's she doing?" Extremely pleased with herself. She held the tooth up to the light like it was a diamond for 10 full minutes. He looked at the lawyers, looked at his phone. "I'll be home by 6, he typed. He put his phone face down. Across the table, Marcus Webb was looking at him with an expression that was doing careful things to stay neutral. "Everything okay?" Webb said. "My daughter lost a tooth," Grant said. "Right." Webb looked back at the slide deck. His expression was not quite hiding a smile. Grant looked at the Ibitide slides, thought about Sophie holding a tooth up to the light like it was a diamond. He was home by 5:45. The tooth went under Sophie's pillow that night inside a small envelope that Sophie had decorated herself with 3 stickers: a star, a frog, and something that might have been a horse or possibly a cloud, the artistic intent unclear. She'd insisted on writing her name on the envelope in purple crayon, in the oversized, top-heavy letters of someone who'd been practicing for 6 months and was deeply proud of the results. Lena watched from the doorway while Grant went through the bedtime ritual, the specific ordering of events that Sophie enforced with the consistency of a union contract. Teeth brushed, water glass filled exactly halfway, the 2 books read in a sequence that was non-negotiable, lights down to the nightlight level, the blanket arranged with the frog side up. "Is the tooth fairy real?" Sophie asked, approximately 3 seconds after Grant said goodnight. "Yes," Grant said. "Danny Kowalski said she's not real. Danny Kowalski is 4 years old. So am I." "Danny Kowalski is wrong," Grant said, with the serenity of a man who had fielded this question in various forms for 8 months and had settled into a firm position on it. "Go to sleep. What if she doesn't find the envelope?" "She'll find it." "But what if—" "Sophie." Grant's voice was gentle, but had a quality that meant this particular conversational thread was closing. "She'll find it, I promise." Sophie considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then, "Okay." She reached up and patted his hand. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Bug." He came out into the hallway and nearly walked into Lena, who stepped back to give him room. They were close enough in the narrow hall that he could smell the faint trace of whatever shampoo she used, something that had gradually become a familiar background note in his house. "That was very confident," she said quietly, meaning the tooth fairy promise. "I set 3 phone alarms," he said. "I've never actually forgotten, but the fear of forgetting keeps me up." "How much does she get?" "Last year, Marcus Webb's kid got $20, and I heard about it for 2 weeks. I'm doing 5 and holding the line." Lena pressed her lips together to keep from laughing too loud near a 4-year-old's door. They both moved down the hallway toward the stairs without discussing it, just gravitating toward the kitchen the way they'd started doing most evenings, drawn by whatever needed doing or whatever conversation was waiting. She made tea. He checked his email standing up, which was a habit she'd started quietly discouraging by handing him things to do. The dish towel, a spoon, the honey. It worked more often than not because the action pulled him out of the screen and back into the room. "She told me today that you can make pancakes in exactly 7 shapes," Lena said. 7 confirmed shapes. "I'm working on an 8th. The elephant is giving me trouble." She demonstrated on her plate at lunch, with her sandwich. "I see she's taken the curriculum home." He put the phone down. "She talked to you much?" "While I was at work?" "A lot. She has a lot of opinions." Lena set his tea in front of him. "She told me that her best friend at school is a girl named Ruby, that Ruby smells like strawberries, and that this is a significant factor in the friendship." Grant sat down. "Ruby's mom sends her to school with strawberry lip balm. Sophie tried to negotiate for the same. I've been holding out." "She seems like someone who wins most of her negotiations eventually. Every single one," he said. "I just make her wait long enough that it feels like she earned it." Lena sat across from him. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her own clothes. She'd borrowed it 2 weeks ago on a cold morning, and it had somehow never made it back to his closet. He'd noticed and said nothing. "Thank you," she said, "for today. The tooth thing. She really wanted you home for it." "I know." "She didn't ask me to text you for the record. I just figured—" "I know," he said again. "I'm glad you did." A comfortable silence settled, the kind they'd developed over the weeks. Not empty, just easy. The refrigerator hummed. Outside the kitchen window, the first real cold of November had settled in, the kind that made the house feel more like an interior, more deliberate. "I had a call today," Lena said. She was turning her mug by the handle, quarter turn at a time. "The catering coordinator position, full-time." He looked up. "Which company?" "Vantage Events. They do corporate and private, based in Hartford, some travel." She paused. It's not what I was doing before. Not a chef role at all. But it pays well. There's stability, and the woman I spoke with seems reasonable. When do you have to decide? By Friday. She stopped turning the mug. The money would let me actually save. Get my own place. Stop. She didn't finish the sentence, but the shape of it was clear. Stop staying here, he said. I wasn't going to say it like that. But that's the thing. She looked at him directly. Yes, that's the thing. Grant was quiet for a moment. He turned his own mug in his hand, something he apparently did without noticing. A shared unconscious habit they'd never remarked on. Is that what you want? The events job? I want stability. Her voice was careful. I've been without it for long enough that it sounds like exactly what I want. That's not the same question. Grant, she set the mug down. I can't afford to optimize for want right now. I understand that. He looked at her. I'm asking anyway. She was quiet for a beat. No, it's not what I want. The admission was small, like something let out from under pressure. But what I want is a 40-seat restaurant that I'm nowhere near being able to afford, so you take the practical option. So I take the practical option and I stop. She caught herself again. I stopped leaning on you. You're not leaning on me. Grant, I'm living in your house. You're living in my guest room. You've cooked for us 4 times this week. You picked Sophie up from school yesterday when Mrs. Ortiz had her appointment. You found the leak in the guest bathroom that I've been ignoring for 6 months. He paused. The accounting on this is not what you think it is. She looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one where she was carefully deciding whether to argue. That's a generous way to frame it. It's an accurate way to frame it. He meant it, and his voice said so. She picked the mug back up. I'm going to take the job, she said. I think I have to. Okay. I might need a little time to find a place before... Lena, there's no timeline. You're not in the way. He looked at her steadily. Take the job. Find the place when you find it. Sophie will be distraught either way, so brace yourself. That surprised a small laugh out of her. Sophie will survive. Sophie will absolutely survive and also inform me of her grievances in detail every morning for 6 weeks. Lena was smiling now, the real one. It still did the same thing to her face that it had the first time he'd seen it, changed the whole topography of it, made her look like someone different and also more accurately herself. I like her, she said. She likes you better than she likes most adults. He tilted his head slightly. Possibly better than she likes me some days. That's not true. She told Ruby's mother that she has a friend at home who makes better sandwiches than Daddy and is also funnier. Lena's face did something complicated. Not quite embarrassed, not quite pleased, somewhere in between. I didn't know she said that. Mrs. Kowalski told me at pickup. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't mind, he added. She looked at him. He looked back. Whatever was in the air between them had been building for weeks, accumulating the way weather does. Slowly, then all at once. Grant felt it and suspected she felt it too, and they had both, without discussing it, been managing it carefully, keeping things in the space where they were comfortable, where nothing was at risk, where whatever this was could stay what it was. He picked up his tea. She looked away first. I'm going to take a bath and read for a while, she said, standing. Early call tomorrow. Good night, Lena. She paused at the door to the hallway. She looked back over her shoulder, and in that moment she looked tired and real and like someone standing at the edge of a decision that had nothing to do with the events coordinator job. Good night, she said, and went upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table for a while after, both hands around his mug, not thinking about anything in particular, or telling himself that. At 2 a.m, his phone alarm went off, and he went upstairs in his socks and swapped a $5 bill for the envelope under Sophie's pillow without waking her. Her small hand was curled near her face, mouth slightly open, the specific utter unconsciousness of a sleeping 4-year-old who had nothing weighing on her. He stood in her doorway for a moment. He did this sometimes, for no reason that he'd ever articulated to anyone. Just stood there. Then he went back to bed. Lena took the job. She told them yes on Thursday morning and came home that evening looking like someone who had made a decision and was still in the process of deciding whether it was the right one. Grant opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for no particular occasion, poured 2 glasses, and handed her one without ceremony. Congratulations, he said. That's premature. It's a good job, and you'll be good at it. He clinked his glass against hers. Drink. She drank. And then she told him everything about the phone call, all the details. The start date, the benefits package, the travel calendar, the thing the hiring manager had said that made her uncertain, and the other thing she'd said that was encouraging. And he listened with his full attention in the way he did, the kind of listening where you don't interrupt and you don't plan your response while the other person is talking. And when she was done, she stopped and seemed to notice that she'd been talking for 20 minutes. I talk a lot when I'm nervous, she said. I know. A pause. I like it. She looked at him. Most people find it. I know what most people find it. He refilled her glass. I said I like it. She looked at the wine, then she looked at him again, briefly, before looking away. The evening moved on in the usual way. Dinner, Sophie's bath, the books, the ritual, the kitchen again after, but there was a different quality to the air, something that had shifted incrementally and would keep shifting whether either of them addressed it or not. November settled in for real, the cold coming down from the hills and staying. Sophie discovered a picture book about volcanoes that became the only book she wanted read to her for 2 straight weeks. Lena's first week at Vantage Events was difficult, and her second was better, and her third was good enough that she came home on the Friday of it looking like someone who might actually belong somewhere. There's a woman at work, she told Grant over dinner. She'd started making dinner most evenings. It had simply evolved into that. Both of them had stopped remarking on it. Named Carol, she's the senior coordinator. She was suspicious of me at first, like, visibly. Suspicious how? Like she thought I was going to try to take her job, or impress the partners, or do something ambitious. Lena passed the bread. I've just been helpful, making sure she looks good on the projects I'm assisting, asking her opinion on things she actually knows more about. And today she brought me coffee and told me I wasn't what she expected. Lena looked like she found this both amusing and slightly exhausting. I'll take it. Sophie across the table had been listening with the selective attention of a child who picks up approximately 40% of adult conversation and retains the wrong parts. What's suspicious mean? She asked. It means you're not sure about something, Grant said, like when I wasn't sure about the broccoli. Exactly. And then I tried it and it was okay. That's the idea, Lena said. Sophie considered this and returned to her pasta, apparently satisfied with the analogy. Grant looked across the table at Lena. She was already looking at him, and then neither of them was. And Sophie was explaining something about volcanoes that she'd picked up from the book. And the dinner table was loud and warm and full in a way that Grant had stopped letting himself want and was now simply in the middle of, whether he'd meant to be or not. The thing about Marcus Webb was that he had excellent instincts about people and was constitutionally incapable of leaving those instincts alone. He showed up at Grant's house on a Saturday in late November under the stated pretense of dropping off documents that could have been emailed, and because Marcus had never done a single meaningless thing in the 15 years Grant had known him, Grant understood there was a different agenda the moment he opened the door. Lena was in the kitchen. Sophie was in the living room watching her allotted 30 minutes of cartoons. Marcus came in, handed over the folder, said hello to Sophie, and then followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen where Lena was. Grant watched the introduction happen. Marcus was charming in the automatic way of someone who'd been in business long enough that it had become muscular memory. Warm, direct, appropriately curious. Lena was polite and slightly guarded in the way she was with people she didn't know yet, asking more than she answered. Then Marcus looked at the stove, where something was simmering, and looked at the coffee Lena had poured him, and looked at the general state of the kitchen, which was the kitchen of a house where someone was making it into a home, and then he looked at Grant with an expression that was carefully arranged to be nothing in particular. How's the acquisition going? Grant said. Progressing, Marcus said. He sipped his coffee. This is excellent coffee. Lena makes it, Grant said. I know, Marcus said. That's not subtle, Grant, what you just did. I wasn't being subtle. She makes better coffee. That's a fact. Lena had her back to both of them, stirring something on the stove, but Grant could see the angle of her shoulders change slightly. Amusement, suppressed. Marcus stayed for an hour. He was good at conversation and genuinely curious about Lena's work in the catering world, and Lena eventually stopped being guarded because he was difficult to stay guarded against. By the time he left, they'd had a real conversation about the events industry, and he told a story about a corporate dinner he'd attended where the entire catering staff had staged a quiet mutiny over a kitchen temperature dispute, and the food had still been excellent. At the door, while Lena was back in the kitchen, Marcus turned to Grant. "She's been here how long?" he said, low enough to stay between them. 6 weeks, roughly. "Okay." Marcus looked at him. "How much of the last 6 weeks have you been pretending you don't know what this is?" Grant met his eyes. "Not the conversation we're having right now. I'm not saying anything bad. I'm saying—" Marcus paused. "I haven't seen you—" He stopped again, adjusting. "You're different. When I called Tuesday, you were home by 5:30. Last month, you were in the office until 7 every night, minimum." Sophie's schedule. "Grant." Marcus just looked at him. A moment passed. "It's not—" Grant started. "I didn't ask what it is. I said you're different." Marcus picked up his folder from the hall table. "That's all?" He opened the door. "Tell Lena the coffee was excellent. She heard you the first time," Grant said. "Good." And Marcus left. Grant stood in his hallway for a moment, then went back to the kitchen. Lena was at the stove. She didn't look up. "He's perceptive," she said. "He's an inconvenience," Grant said. "He likes you. You can tell because he's honest with you instead of careful." She looked over her shoulder briefly. "That's actually hard to find." Grant didn't have a response for that, so he got the plates down and started setting the table, and the conversation moved on, and the thing Marcus had named continued to exist between them without either of them touching it directly. December arrived the way it always did in Connecticut, with a seriousness, the cold becoming structural rather than seasonal, the ground hardening, the bare trees settling into their winter shapes. Sophie became consumed with the machinery of Christmas, with an intensity that Grant found both exhausting and, if he was being honest, legitimately exciting. She made lists. She revised the lists. She explained the list to Lena in great detail, not asking, just sharing, the way she did with things she considered important information. Lena listened to every list with full attention. She never talked down to Sophie or simplified herself, just shifted into the register that Sophie operated in, took the list seriously, offered opinions when asked, and stayed quiet when not. One evening, Grant came downstairs at 9:30, Sophie long asleep, and found Lena at the kitchen table with Sophie's most recent Christmas list and a notebook open beside it, writing things down. "What are you doing?" he said. She looked up. "I'm cross-referencing. She mentioned 3 different things she wants that are all basically the same thing. A craft kit in December, an art kit in November, and a making stuff kit from the list she made in October. I think it's the same request expressed 3 different ways, so you don't accidentally buy all 3. Grant looked at the notebook. She had Sophie's list in one column and her analysis in the other, with connecting notes. He sat down across from her. He looked at her for a long moment. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He shook his head slightly. "I'm just—" He stopped. "You're just what?" "Glad you're here," he said. It came out more plainly than he intended, not decorated, not managed, just the flat, true thing. She went very still. She looked down at the notebook. "Grant, I'm not saying anything about it," he said quickly. "It's just true. I'm glad you're here." He paused. "That's all." She looked back up at him. There was something in her face that was working hard to stay composed and not entirely succeeding. "I'm glad I'm here too," she said carefully. "I didn't expect to be, but I am." The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car moved down the street, and its headlights swept briefly across the window. "I've been looking at apartments," she said, and it felt like a confession. "There are 2 in Hartford that I could afford on this salary. Good neighborhoods, close to work." "That's practical," he said. "It is." She wasn't looking at the notebook anymore. "I'm going to look at them next week." "Okay. And I want you to know—" She stopped. "I need you to know that whatever I decide has nothing to do with—" She stopped again. She pressed her lips together. "I'm not confused about what this is," she said. "I'm just aware that I'm in someone else's house, and that I came here with nothing, and that the position I'm in makes it—" She was choosing words carefully. "I'm not going to be someone who confuses gratitude with something else. I don't want to do that to you, or to Sophie." Grant was quiet for a long moment. "I appreciate you saying that." "I mean it. I know you mean it." He met her eyes. "For what it's worth, I'm not confused either. I know what I think, and I know why I haven't said it. He paused. The last time I was sure about something, it turned out I was sure about the wrong version of the situation. He looked at his hands. That makes you careful. What happened? She said quietly. She didn't know the full story. He'd referenced Melissa in pieces over the weeks, but always at the edges, never straight on. He was quiet long enough that she didn't push. Her name was Melissa, he said. We were engaged. Sophie was 4 months old. She sat across this table, different house, and told me she couldn't do it. The baby. The version of me that came with the baby. He said it evenly, without residual anger. She wasn't a bad person. I think she was just honest earlier than most people would have been. But it took me a long time to see it that way. How long? About 2 years to stop being angry, another year after that to actually believe I wasn't going to repeat it somehow. He looked up. The fear of repeating it doesn't go away, I don't think. You just get better at not letting it make all your decisions. Lena was looking at him with that direct, unsentimental attention he'd come to recognize as one of the most consistent things about her. She missed out, she said. That's not a kind thing to say, but it's true. He looked at her. Sophie's remarkable, Lena said. And you made her that way, mostly by yourself. She stopped. That's not nothing, Grant. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. They sat at the table for another hour, talking about other things. Her job, his upcoming deal, Sophie's volcano phase that showed no signs of ending. A movie they'd both seen in different years and disagreed about in ways that turned into a 20-minute debate neither of them won. When she finally went upstairs, he sat alone for a while, as he did most nights, and thought about what she'd said. That's not nothing, Grant. He told himself the same thing for 4 years in various forms, in the trying to believe it way. Hearing it from outside himself, from someone who had no particular reason to give him anything, landed differently than he'd have expected. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The thing they weren't saying was present in the house the same way weather is present. You can go about your day in it. You can function completely, but it's always there, pressing lightly on every surface. And then December brought its own complications. Dana called on a Wednesday evening, and Grant made the mistake of answering in the kitchen while Lena was there. His sister had a voice that could fill a room through a phone speaker without being on speaker, and the first words out of her mouth were, I heard from Mom that you have a woman staying at your house, and I would like to understand the situation in detail, please. Grant moved to the hallway. He could hear Lena in the kitchen, very deliberately making more noise with the dishes than was necessary. She's a friend, he said. For how long? 6 weeks. A pause. Grant. Donna. 6 weeks is not... A guest is 6 days. 6 weeks is a situation. It's not a situation. She's getting back on her feet. I have a guest room. It's... Tell me about her. I'm not doing this. Grant Thomas Holloway, I have not asked you about a woman in 3 years because every time I tried, you looked like I was performing surgery on you without anesthesia. I'm asking now. Tell me about her. He leaned against the wall. He could hear Sophie upstairs, the muffled soundtrack of her bath time, some negotiation happening about shampoo. Her name is Lena, he said. She's 30. She's smart and she's... He paused. She's good with Sophie. A longer pause from Dana. That's not nothing. He almost laughed. People keep saying that to me. Because it's true. Dana's voice had changed, gone quieter. Are you happy, Grant? Actually... He thought about the kitchen table and the cross-referenced Christmas list and the debate about a movie neither of them had liked the ending of. I think so, he said. You think? I'm working on being sure. He pushed off the wall. I have to go. Sophie's in the bath. This conversation isn't over. It is for tonight. Grant, good night, Dana. He hung up, went back to the kitchen. Lena was drying a pot with great concentration. Your sister sounds like a person who gets what she wants, she said. Always has. He took the pot from her and put it in the cabinet. She means well. I assumed. She sounds like someone who means it very loudly. That's accurate. Lena folded the dish towel. She asked about me? She'd heard from my mother, apparently. Your mother knows I'm here? Small family. Information travels. He paused. My mother also means well. Lena looked at the folded dish towel. That's a lot of people who mean well in my direction. It's not... He stopped. They care about Sophie. And me. They're curious. I know. She looked up. I'm not upset, She paused. It makes it real. When people outside this house know you're here. Is that bad? She thought about it honestly, which was the way she thought about most things. No, she said finally. I don't think so. She looked at him again, steady and direct. I think I just needed a second to catch up to it. He nodded. Didn't push. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs in her towel, looking like someone who had important information. Daddy, the shampoo ran out. We have more in the hall closet, Grant called up. It's too high up. I'll be right up. He looked at Lena. She looked back. Go, she said. I'll finish here. He went. And she stayed and finished the kitchen, and when he came back downstairs 30 minutes later with a damp-haired Sophie in her rabbit pajamas, who was still explaining something about volcanoes, Lena had made tea and left his on the counter where he'd find it, and the kitchen was clean, and the porch light was on even though nobody was going out. The small things. The gravity. It was 11:30 on a Thursday night in December, 3 weeks before Christmas, and whatever was happening in that house had long since outgrown the language of guest room and temporary and friend, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was ready to be the first to say so out loud. But the tea was on the counter, and the light was on. And in the morning, Sophie would wake at 6:15 and come downstairs in her rabbit pajamas, and the house would fill up with noise the way it always did now, and the day would begin again in the warm, ordinary way of a life that was becoming something none of them had planned. Which was, Grant thought, carrying his tea to the couch and sitting down in the dark living room, maybe the point. Christmas came and went the way it does when there's a 4-year-old in the house. Loudly, completely, with a level of emotional investment in the unwrapping of presents that made the whole thing feel genuinely important rather than obligatory. Sophie got the craft kit. She got it in the version that Lena had identified as the consolidated request, a large flat box with compartments for every kind of material a 4-year-old could want. And she sat on the living room floor Christmas morning surrounded by tissue paper and opened every compartment with the focused reverence of someone cataloging a discovery. Lena had stayed. The apartment viewings in Hartford had happened. Both of them, 2 Saturdays in a row, Grant watching Sophie while Lena drove herself to look at the places she'd found. She'd come back from both saying they were fine, reasonable, what you'd expect for the price. She'd filled out an application for the second one on a Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table, while Sophie drew volcanoes nearby and Grant worked through a contract in his office. The application sat on the corner of the table for 4 days. On the 5th day, Lena picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, and put it in the recycling bin without saying anything. Grant saw it happen from the hallway. He didn't say anything either. By unspoken agreement, they both pretended the application had simply ceased to exist, which was, all things considered, the most honest response either of them had to the situation. So she stayed through Christmas, and the holidays moved through the house in the particular way of a year wrapping itself up. And by the time January arrived and Sophie went back to preschool, and Lena went back to work at Vantage Events, and Grant went back to the office, there was an order to their days that had calcified into something you couldn't call temporary anymore without lying about it. The problem with good things settling in is that other people notice. It started with small things. A comment from Sophie's preschool teacher, Mrs. Aldridge, a friendly woman who Grant had always liked for her directness, who mentioned at pickup one afternoon that Sophie had told the class she had a friend who lived at her house. She explained it very thoroughly, Mrs. Aldridge said, with the diplomatic tone of someone who had opinions they were choosing not to share. I just wanted to make sure Sophie was doing well with any changes at home. Grant said Sophie was doing well. Mrs. Aldridge nodded and said that was apparent. The conversation closed cleanly, but left a residue. Then there was the neighborhood. Ashford Heights was the kind of place where people were too well-mannered to stare, which meant they noticed everything and said nothing directly and expressed themselves instead through the particular quality of their hellos. Catherine Marsh, who lived 4 houses down and had brought Grant a casserole when he first moved in with a baby and no wife, stopped him on the sidewalk in early January and said she'd seen lights on late over at his place and hoped everything was well. Grant said everything was fine. Catherine smiled the smile of someone filing information. It's nice, she said, that you have company. She said company the way people say a word when they mean a different word. Grant said thank you and walked home. These were minor, the kind of friction that comes from being a visible person in a small circle, and Grant had been visible in Ashford Heights for 2 years and knew how to move through it. He didn't think much of it. What he wasn't prepared for was Diane Holloway. His mother arrived on a Saturday in late January, which she'd announced 3 days in advance, which was her version of spontaneity. She came with a rental car from Bradley Airport, a week's worth of luggage for a 2-night visit, and the focused energy of a 63-year-old woman who had decided she was owed information and was going to collect it in person. Lena handled it better than Grant did. She was in the kitchen when Diane arrived, making lunch, Sophie on the stool beside her learning to measure things, a process that involved more spillage than measurement, but which they both found satisfying. And when Grant brought his mother through the front door and into the kitchen, the introduction happened in a space already warm and occupied and smelling like garlic and something baking, which was either the best or worst possible context depending on the agenda you arrived with. Diane Holloway was a tall woman, gray-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested she had opinions about posture and sharp eyes that she'd pass directly to Grant. She looked at Lena. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at Sophie, who had turned on the stool and said with great authority, "Grandma, I'm learning to measure things." And Diane's face went through 3 different expressions in about a second and settled on something that was close to moved. "I can see that," Diane said. "What are you measuring?" "Flour." Sophie held up a measuring cup that was approximately a third full of flour, the rest distributed on the counter and her shirt. "Lena says you have to level it off or it doesn't count." "Lena's right," Diane said. She looked at Lena. "She's right." "Thank you," Lena said. The 2 women looked at each other, and something passed between them. An assessment, mutual and rapid, and not unfriendly. "Lunch is in about 20 minutes. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be lovely," Diane said. "Don't let me interrupt." Which meant, of course, that she was watching everything. Grant knew his mother the way you know weather. He could read her from the set of her shoulders and the pace of her questions. She helped Sophie with the flour. She talked to Lena about the baking, then about Vantage events, then about where Lena had trained, and Lena answered without being guarded, but without performing either, which Grant suspected was exactly the right thing to do with Diane Holloway. Lunch happened. Sophie talked about volcanoes. Diane asked follow-up questions about volcanoes with what appeared to be genuine interest. Lena made the coffee the way she always made it, and Diane held the cup and looked at it and said, "This is excellent," which was a sentence Diane Holloway did not distribute carelessly. Afterwards, Sophie went down for her nap. Lena said she had some work emails to deal with and took herself upstairs with her laptop, cleanly, without being asked, which Grant appreciated more than he said. He and his mother sat at the kitchen table with the remains of lunch between them and the particular charged quiet of 2 people with a lot to say, and one of them deciding how to start. Diane went first. "She's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know exactly. Your father thought I was building up some idea of a gold digger." She said it plainly, not apologetically. "I wasn't. I was just curious." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "She's not that." "No. She's—" Diane paused, choosing. "She's real. You know what I mean by that? Some people, you talk to them and you feel like you're talking to the version of themselves they've decided to show you. She's not doing that." She paused again. "Sophie is settled. Sophie loves her." "I can see that. And I can see that it's not. It's not performed. It's real on both sides." She looked at her son. "How real is it on your side?" Grant looked at the table. "Mom." "I'm not meddling. I'm asking." "Those are the same thing for you." "Grant." She said it the way she'd always said his name when she wanted his full attention. He looked up. "I watched you for 3 years rebuild yourself after Melissa. I watched you do it well. And I watched you do it alone, and I watched it cost you things you pretended it didn't cost you. I'm not asking to meddle. I'm asking because I love you, and I can see that something is happening in this house, and I want to know if you're going to let it be what it is." Grant was quiet for a moment. "It's complicated. Most things worth having are." "She came here with nothing," he said. "She's just getting back on her feet. The position is—" He stopped. "The position," Diane said carefully, "is that you're both adults in the same house who clearly—" She stopped herself. "I don't need details. What I'm saying is, the power difference that you're worried about is not as wide as you think. That woman upstairs is not fragile. She's not helpless. She's someone who knocked on your door because she trusted you, And the fact that she trusted you correctly doesn't make her beholden to you. He looked at her. Don't, Diane said. Use protecting her as a reason to not be honest with her. That's a particular kind of cowardice that looks like consideration. She paused. Your father did it to me once, decided what was good for me without telling me. Took me 6 months to forgive him. Grant absorbed this. How did you know? Because I know you. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, briskly, then let go. Also, Sophie told me that Lena makes better sandwiches than you. Everyone knows that story, apparently. Sophie's not subtle. She absolutely is not. Diane finished her coffee. I like her, she said. That's my conclusion. I like her, and I think she's good for Sophie, and I think you know exactly what you feel, and you're just afraid to have been wrong again. She stood, picking up her cup. Don't be afraid of it. Fear has kept you alone long enough. She took the cup to the sink, and the conversation was apparently over, which was how Diane Holloway had always operated. Say the thing, land it, move on. Grant sat at the table and looked at his hands. Upstairs somewhere, he could hear the faint sound of Lena's laptop keys. He sat there for a while. The complications arrived in February, which, in retrospect, felt inevitable. Good things, when they reach a certain visibility, attract people who have opinions about them. Grant had lived in Ashford Heights long enough to understand that his life was mildly public in the particular way of a wealthy man in a small, wealthy community. He was known, his business was known, his status as a single father was known and quietly admired in the way that single fathers are admired while single mothers doing the same thing are simply expected to manage. He was used to being visible. He wasn't used to Lena being visible with him. It started in a way so ordinary it barely registered. His friend and business associate, Thomas Hale, old money, fourth generation Connecticut, the kind of man who wore the same brand of watch his grandfather wore and considered this a virtue, hosted a dinner party at his house in Weston. The kind of party where the guest list had been curated and the food was excellent and the conversation was approximately 70% performing and 30% actual. Grant had been to 4 of these in the past 2 years. He always went alone, stayed 2 hours, left before the point where someone would try to set him up with someone. This time he asked Lena. He asked her on a Tuesday while she was reading on the couch and Sophie was asleep, and he asked it the way he'd been practicing in his head for 3 days, which was simply and without decoration. There's a dinner at Thomas Hale's on Saturday. I'd like to take you if you want to go. She looked up from her book. As what? What? As what? As your... She paused. I want to know what I'm walking in as. He looked at her steadily. As someone I want to be there with. She held his gaze for a moment. That's not an answer. It's the honest answer. She looked back at her book. Then she set it face down on her knee. Okay, she said. Yes, I'll go. She bought a dress. He knew this because she mentioned it once and then not again, which was the manner in which she handled things she'd decided on. It was dark green. He found out Saturday evening when she came downstairs, simple and clean, nothing that announced itself. She'd done something different with her hair. She looked entirely like herself, which was exactly the thing that made Grant stand very still in the hallway for a moment. You look nice, he said. You've never seen me in a dress before, she said. I noticed. She looked at him. A small, private smile. Don't make it a thing, she said. Wouldn't dream of it, he said. Let's go. The dinner was 26 people in a dining room designed for 26 people. The kind of coordination that looked effortless and cost a great deal of effort. Thomas Hale greeted them at the door with the practiced warmth of a good host, shook Grant's hand, looked at Lena with an interest that was socially appropriate and barely concealed, and said, Welcome, we're very glad you're here. Grant introduced her. First name, her work at Vantage Events, nothing else. He watched the room's reaction with the peripheral attention he'd developed in 12 years of business negotiations. Who noticed? How long they looked? What their expressions did in the moment they looked. Most people were fine. This was a room of adults who knew how to behave in public, which meant their curiosity was managed and their manners were intact. They talked to Lena, some with genuine interest, and she held herself well, not trying to impress, not shrinking, just there. The problem was Diane Yates. Diane Yates was not related to Grant's mother and shared only the first name and a certain quality of directness. But where Diane Holloway's directness was warm and purposeful, Diane Yates's was something else. She was in her late 50s, married to a hedge fund manager, and had known Thomas Hale since college, which she mentioned within the first 3 minutes of any conversation as a way of establishing coordinates. She'd been politely cool to Grant for years on the basis of nothing he'd ever identified. He'd decided she simply had categories for people, and he'd never fit cleanly into one of hers. He saw her looking at Lena during the first course, not rudely, more clinically, the way someone takes a measurement. The conversation happened at the dessert stage, in the loose milling around that followed the formal seating, wine in hand, the room's energy shifting from dinner party to cocktail party. Grant was talking to Thomas's brother-in-law about something Grant would not later be able to recall because he was tracking, with one part of his attention, where Lena was and how she was doing. She was talking to a woman named Claire Sorden, late 30s, in tech, someone Grant had always found genuine, and they seemed to be in a real conversation, both of them leaning slightly in. He felt himself relax a degree. Then Diane Yates moved toward Lena with the deliberate pace of someone with a destination. He couldn't hear the conversation from where he stood. He could see it. He watched Diane Yates open the exchange with something that looked pleasant and was probably not. He watched Lena's posture stay even. He watched Diane Yates's hand gesture, an encompassing gesture, meaning something about the room or the house or something larger. He watched Lena's face stay composed. Then Diane Yates said something that changed the temperature between them visibly, and Grant put his drink down on the nearest surface and moved. He covered the room in the time it took Diane Yates to say one more thing, which he caught the end of. "I'm sure you understand, it must be a very comfortable arrangement, and he certainly can afford—" "Diane." His voice came out quieter than he intended, which was worse than if he'd been louder. Both women looked at him. Diane Yates had the composed expression of someone who was prepared to be misunderstood. Lena's face was doing something controlled and careful that Grant recognized as the expression of a person managing a very strong response. "I was just asking Lena about her," Diane Yates began. "I heard what you were asking." He looked at her steadily. "I think you've reached the end of this conversation." "Grant, I wasn't trying to—" "Diane." He said her name with the particular quality of someone who has made a decision and is not re-examining it. "We're done here." Diane Yates looked at him for a moment with an expression that was close to surprise. He'd been polite to her for years, they both knew it, and then she recalibrated into something cooler and moved away, and was absorbed into another conversation within 30 seconds with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing social situations for decades. Grant looked at Lena. She was looking at a spot slightly past his shoulder. Her jaw was set. She was holding her wine glass with the careful stillness of someone who needed something to hold. "What did she say?" he said. "Grant, I'm asking." She looked at him then. She asked how long I'd been— She paused. She said the next part flatly, quoting without inflection. "How long I'd been in my current situation, and whether I'd known you before I needed assistance, or only after." She paused again. "And then the thing you heard." He looked at her. He felt something running through him that was hot and clear, and not quite anger, but in the same neighborhood. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry. You didn't say it. I'm sorry it happened here." She looked away, looked around the room. He could see her recalibrating, deciding something, one of those rapid internal decisions she made that you could watch happen on her face if you knew what to look for. "I want to go," she said quietly. "Can we go? I don't want a scene. I just want to leave." "Yes, let's go." He found Thomas, offered an excuse that Thomas accepted with the good grace of a man who understood that sometimes things happened at dinner parties he wasn't fully aware of, and they were outside in 4 minutes, coats on, the cold February air coming down on them like something corrective. They walked to the car. Lena got in. He got in. He started the engine. He pulled out of the driveway. Neither of them said anything for 2 full minutes. "I'm not fragile," Lena said, looking out the passenger window. "I want to say that before anything else." "I know." What she said was— She stopped. It was designed to be true enough to land. That's the worst kind of thing. When someone says something that contains enough real material that you can't just dismiss it. Her voice was controlled. "I am in a comfortable arrangement. I am in your house. The fact that that's not the whole story doesn't make her wrong about the part she named. She was wrong about your intentions." "She doesn't know my intentions." "No, but I do." She turned from the window and looked at him. The streetlights were passing overhead in intervals. Do you? Yes. He kept his eyes on the road. You knocked on my door because you needed somewhere safe, because you'd exhausted every other option, and you trusted me not to use it against you. And everything since then has been you trying to get back on your feet as fast as possible without owing anyone anything. He paused. That's who you are. I've had months to watch it. Diane Yates has had approximately 40 minutes. She was quiet for a long moment. She's not the only one who thinks it. I know. People look at it and they see the obvious version. Yes, they do. And you don't care? She said it genuinely, not accusingly, like she was trying to take an accurate reading. He thought about it honestly, which she always gave him room to do. I care in the abstract, he said. I care that you were embarrassed. I don't care what Diane Yates thinks about my life. What about what people who matter think? Marcus knows you. My mother met you, my sister will meet you eventually, and she'll have 17 opinions about everything, and approximately 0 of them will involve your bank account, because Dana has met enough wealthy people to know that money is the least interesting thing about anyone. He glanced over at her. The people who matter have access to the actual information. She turned back to the window. He drove. I looked at another apartment, she said after a while. I know. You know? You had a Hartford Craigslist tab open last week. I didn't say anything. She was quiet. I keep looking, and I keep not applying. She paused. I don't know what that means. I think you know what it means. Grant. His name in that tone was its own kind of sentence. I'm not pushing, he said. I'm just saying I think you know. She didn't respond, but she also didn't argue. They got home. The house was lit. They'd left lights on, the porch light, the kitchen window warm from the interior. Mrs. Ortiz had stayed with Sophie, and when she left, she reported that Sophie had been asleep since 8:30, with no incidents except one very detailed question about whether fish dreamed. They stood in the kitchen after Mrs. Ortiz left. Lena was still in her green dress. He'd loosened his tie. The house was quiet with Sophie asleep upstairs, and the night outside pressing against the windows. I'm going to say something, Lena said. She was standing on the other side of the kitchen island, not looking at him. And I need you to not respond right away. I need you to just hear it. Okay, he said. She took a breath. I've been telling myself for 3 months that I'm careful about this because of the position I'm in, because I don't want to be someone who confuses gratitude with something real. She paused. But that's only half of it. The other half is that I'm scared, not of you, of being wrong again. She finally looked at him. The last time I was sure about something, the thing I was sure about turned out to be a person who needed me to be smaller than I was. And I got very used to being small. And now I'm here, and you're the most... She stopped, started again. You're the first person in a long time who's never once made me feel like I should take up less space. He looked at her across the kitchen island. He didn't say anything yet, because she'd asked him not to. And that terrifies me, she said. Because the only thing I know to do when something is good is wait for the part where it stops being good. She exhaled. That's what I wanted to say. I'm done. He looked at her for a long moment. 2 things, he said. First, whoever made you think you needed to be smaller is the reason I spent 6 months trying to convince you that the restaurant idea isn't crazy because you'd already filed it under things that won't work before you'd tried. He came around the island, not quickly. Second, I'm scared too. I want you to know that. I'm not standing on the other side of this feeling certain. I'm standing here feeling terrified, and also like not saying anything is starting to cost more than saying it. She looked up at him. They were close now, close enough that he could see the small details of her. The faint line between her eyebrows when she was thinking hard, the slight asymmetry of her face that he'd stopped noticing as an individual feature because it was simply her face. So say it, she said. I love you, he said. I don't know when it started. I know it was a while ago. I'm not telling you this so you'll say it back. I'm telling you because it's true. And because tonight someone talked to you like you were a category of person rather than an actual person. And I need you to have at least one person in your life who says the true thing out loud. He paused. That's it. That's what I've got. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were doing something he hadn't seen before. Not quite vulnerable, not quite brave. Something that lived right on the border between those 2 things. I'm not ready to say it back, she said. I know. Not because I don't... She stopped. Lena, you don't have to explain it. I want to explain it. She looked up at him. I'm not ready because I've said it before when I didn't mean it correctly, and I need to be sure. I need to say it when I'm not in someone's house and not tangled up in all of this. I need to be somewhere solid before I say it. That's fair, he said. You're not... She looked at him. You're okay with that? Yes. Most people wouldn't be. I'm not most people. He said it simply, not boasting. And I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, settled, like a thing that had been held under tension finally finding its position. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. Just that, just her hand, a small, warm weight through his jacket. I know, she said. They stood there in the kitchen in the quiet of the sleeping house, neither of them moving toward anything more than this, which was already, by any accurate measure, everything. And then Sophie's voice came floating down the stairs. Daddy, I had a dream. They stepped apart. Grant exhaled, not frustrated, more like someone releasing something that could be put down and picked back up. He looked at Lena. She was already smiling, the real one, the one that changed her whole face. Go, she said. I'll be right back. He went upstairs. Sophie had dreamed about volcanoes, which surprised no one, and he sat on the edge of her bed for 10 minutes while she reported the dream in extensive detail. She fell back asleep mid-sentence, which was the particular gift of being 4. He came back downstairs. Lena had made tea. His was on the counter where she always left it. She was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around her own mug, and she looked up when he came in, and she looked like someone who was afraid of something and choosing to stay anyway. He sat across from her. Tell me something true, she said, something you've never told anyone. He thought about it. When Sophie was 3 weeks old and I was the most exhausted I have ever been in my life, I sat in the kitchen at 3 a.m. feeding her, and I talked to her. For about an hour, I told her about the hardware store, about my dad, about things I wanted to do that I'd stopped believing I'd have time for. He paused. I think I was actually talking to myself. But she looked at me the whole time like she understood every word. Lena was quiet for a moment. What things did you want to do? Travel, not work travel, the other kind. Go somewhere with no agenda. He looked at the table. Learn to cook properly, not event food. Just real food for real people. He looked up. I'm slowly getting there on that one. She smiled. You're a better cook than you think. You're a better cook than everyone I know, so your bar is calibrated wrong. She laughed. Tea in hand, green dress, kitchen light. Real. Tell me something true, he said. She considered. When I was 26, I had enough money saved to sign a lease on a space in New Haven. Small place, terrible location, would have needed 6 months of work. I went to sign the paperwork and I drove around the block 4 times and then went home. She looked at her tea. I told myself the location was wrong, but the location wasn't wrong. I was just... She stopped. I was so afraid of it not working that I didn't try. She paused. I've thought about that a lot lately. The restaurant. The restaurant. She looked at him. I keep thinking about it differently now. Like it's not this impossible thing in some future I can't see. Like it might just be a problem with components that you solve one piece at a time. He looked at her steadily. It is. I know. She said it quietly, like she was trying it on. I know. They sat there in the kitchen until midnight, trading the small true things that people trade when they've decided to let each other in. And the tea went cold, and neither of them moved to make more. And outside, the February cold held its grip on Connecticut, and inside the house was warm in the specific way of a place where something important has finally been said out loud, and the walls have absorbed it, and everything is different now, technically. Except nothing looks different from the outside, which was fine. The outside would catch up. The morning after felt ordinary, which was somehow the strangest part. Grant came downstairs at 6:50 to find Sophie already at the kitchen table with her craft kit open, sorting buttons by color with the intensity of a surgeon, and Lena at the stove making eggs. The coffee was already made. The kitchen smelled like butter and toast. Nothing had a sign on it that said something significant happened here last night, and yet everything felt different in the way a room feels different after you've rearranged the furniture. Same room, same contents, different geometry. You're up early, Grant said to Sophie. I had a button idea, Sophie said without looking up from her sorting. This was a complete explanation. Lena glanced over her shoulder. Morning. Just that. Nothing waited, and he understood that she was doing what she did, letting things settle into place without forcing them, giving everything room to be what it was before they decided what to call it. Morning, he said. He poured his coffee. He sat down at the table. Sophie showed him the button idea, which involved sorting them into what she described as families, each family distinguished by color and number of holes. He examined the families seriously and offered feedback. Lena set a plate in front of him without being asked. This was what it was now. He let himself just be in it. The weeks that followed were not uncomplicated, but they had a different quality than what came before. A quality of things moving forward rather than hovering in place. Whatever had been named in the kitchen that February night had given both of them something to stand on, even if they were still working out exactly how to stand on it. Lena took small steps so deliberately and so consistently that Grant found himself genuinely moved by the watching of it. She set aside money every paycheck into an account she'd opened specifically for the restaurant. She told him about it on a Tuesday, matter-of-factly, like it was information he was entitled to. It's not enough yet, she said. It won't be enough for a long time, but it exists now. She said it exists now with a quiet emphasis that meant something. The thing she'd driven past 4 times and then fled from at 26 had a bank account. It was real in the way that only money and paper make things real. She started writing, not a journal. She wasn't a journal person, she'd said once, too much like talking to yourself, but notes, ideas, menu concepts, seasonal variations, the 40-seat floor plan that kept evolving on legal pads she accumulated at an alarming rate. She spread them across the kitchen table on Sunday mornings while Sophie drew and Grant read, and the house had the comfortable noise of people working on their own things in proximity to each other, which is one of the more underrated forms of intimacy. This is the section that doesn't work, she said one Sunday in March, turning a legal pad toward Grant. She'd drawn a kitchen layout, revised it twice, crossed out both revisions. The service flow from the kitchen to the tables. I can't figure out how to make it work with a prep area that size. He looked at it. What's the constraint? The size of the space I can realistically afford versus the kitchen requirements for the menu I want. She pointed. If I downsize the kitchen, I can't do the volume I need to be profitable. If I don't downsize it, the dining area is too small to carry the revenue. He turned the pad, looked at it from a different angle. What if the constraint isn't the kitchen size, but the menu volume? What if you designed the menu around the kitchen rather than the other way around? She looked at him. Meaning, what if you launched with 30% less on the menu than you're planning? Tighter, more focused, higher margin per dish, less prep complexity, smaller kitchen requirement. Then you expand the menu as you find your footing. He tapped the pad. The restaurant you're planning is the Year 3 restaurant. Design the Year 1 restaurant first. She was quiet, looking at the pad. She stopped. It's not a compromise. It's a sequence. She looked at him with an expression he'd seen before, the one where she was recalibrating something she'd been carrying wrong. She pulled the pad back and started writing. He went back to his book. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Are you talking about the restaurant? Yes, Lena said, still writing. Can I come? When it's open. What will be on the menu? Things that are good. Sophie considered this acceptable and went back to her drawing. Grant turned a page. The Sunday felt unremarkable. It was one of the best days he could remember in years. In March, Grant had a problem at work that he handled badly. The acquisition of a mid-sized logistics company called Meridian Point had been in progress since November, and in March the deal developed a complication, a liability that the target company's legal team had not, it emerged, been fully forthcoming about. The kind of complication that required immediate, focused attention and the willingness to apply pressure to people who didn't want pressure applied. Grant spent 2 weeks in back-to-back meetings and calls that ran past 8 o'clock most evenings, and he came home to a house where Sophie was already asleep, and Lena had saved him dinner, and he ate it standing up over the sink because sitting down felt like a commitment he couldn't make with his brain still running at work speed. He was short with her twice. Once about something trivial, a question she asked about his schedule that he answered with a terseness that the question didn't warrant. Once worse, at the end of the second week, when he came in at 9:15 to find Sophie's stuffed rabbit on the kitchen floor, and he picked it up with a comment about the house that he shouldn't have made and that Lena received with a stillness that was the clearest possible signal that he'd landed wrong. She didn't fight back, which was, in some ways, harder to deal with than if she had. He came to her later that night. She was reading in her room, still the guest room, still technically, though the guestness of it had long since drained away, and he knocked on the open door and she looked up. "I was a jerk twice this week," he said. "The schedule thing and the rabbit thing. The rabbit thing especially. I'm sorry." She looked at him. She put the book down. "You're drowning at work. That's not an excuse." "I know. I'm not making it one. I'm just—" She paused. "I know you're drowning. I've been watching it." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "You don't have to manage everything alone. I'm here. You're allowed to say when something is hard." He leaned against the doorframe. "It's a deal thing. It'll resolve." "I'm not asking about the deal. I'm asking about you." He looked at her. She looked back. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I'm tired," he said. "I've been tired for 2 weeks, and it's the kind of tired that makes me into someone I don't particularly like." He paused. "I don't like being that person in front of you. I'm not here for the version of you that has it together all the time." She said it directly. "I know that version. He's fine. I'm talking about the other version. The other version isn't very good company. I didn't say I wanted good company. I said I was here." She held his gaze. "Come sit down. Tell me about the deal." He sat on the edge of the bed. He told her about the deal. Not all of it. Some of it was confidential, and some of it was technical, and she'd have said so if he bored her. But the shape of it, the thing that was actually making it hard. She listened. She asked 2 questions that were exactly the right questions and which Marcus Webb would have been pleased by. At the end of it, she said, "So the problem isn't the liability itself. It's that solving it correctly takes longer than the partners want to wait." "Yes. And you're not willing to solve it quickly and incorrectly." "No." "So you're going to take the longer path and eat the pressure in the meantime." "Yes." She looked at him. "That's going to work out." "You don't know that. I know that doing the right thing at a slower pace is a better bet than doing the wrong thing faster. I know that much." She paused. "You're going to be okay." He looked at her. She said it simply, without performance, and it landed the way simple things do when they're true. "Thank you," he said. "Come to bed at a reasonable hour tonight," she said. "That's all I ask." He laughed. Quietly, so as not to wake Sophie. "Deal," he said. He came to bed at 11:15, which was the most reasonable hour he'd managed in 2 weeks. The deal closed 3 weeks later on terms that were better than the partners had expected when they'd been pushing for speed. Marcus sent him a bottle of good whiskey and a text that said only, "You were right." Grant sent back, "I know," and then felt immediately like a jerk about it, and followed up with a longer message that Marcus responded to with a thumbs up, which was Marcus's highest form of approval. Spring came to Connecticut with the particular relief of a state that had been through enough winter and was ready to be done with it. The trees on Whitmore Lane came back incrementally. First the suggestion of green, then actual green, then the full, slightly aggressive green of a New England May that was making up for lost time. Sophie discovered caterpillars, which briefly became the only thing in the world. She collected 3 of them in a jar with holes punched in the lid, named them, and explained their habits to Lena every morning with the comprehensive focus she'd previously devoted to volcanoes. Lena listened to all of it. She looked up the specific caterpillar species and told Sophie things about them that Sophie then reported to her preschool class as original research. She told Mrs. Aldridge that she was a caterpillar scientist, Grant told Lena one evening. She is, essentially. Mrs. Aldridge asked if she could speak to her parent about the caterpillar situation. Lena looked up. "Is that bad?" Apparently 2 of the caterpillars were ones Mrs. Aldridge had been raising in the classroom, and they went missing in Sophie's coat pocket. He kept his expression neutral. "There are feelings about this." Lena pressed both hands over her mouth. "Did she steal classroom caterpillars?" Sophie maintained she liberated them. They were both laughing now, the kind that comes out sideways when you're trying to contain it. "What did you say to Mrs. Aldridge?" "I said we'd return them promptly, and I apologized sincerely, and I did not laugh even slightly until I was in the car. And then? And then I called Marcus and couldn't get through the story. She was still laughing. Sophie's going to be trouble," he said, extremely specific, principled trouble. "The best kind." They looked at each other across the kitchen, both of them still smiling. "Yeah," he said, "the best kind." The caterpillars were returned. Mrs. Aldridge was gracious. Sophie remained unrepentant but agreed after a careful negotiation that future wildlife management required parental consultation. Dana came in April. Grant had told her about Lena over the phone, properly, not the abbreviated version he'd given in December, but the actual story, from the knock on the door to February's kitchen conversation. Dana had listened without interrupting, which was almost unprecedented, and at the end had said, "I want to meet her," not as a request, but as a statement of intent. She arrived on a Friday afternoon with the controlled chaos of someone who lived life at full volume and had learned to move efficiently within it. She was 35, 2 years younger than Grant, with the same dark eyes and an entirely different relationship to silence, which was that she found it deeply suspicious and tried to fill it at all times. She taught high school history in Boston, had been with her partner Theo for 6 years, and had an opinion on approximately everything. She met Lena in the hallway on the way in and said within 40 seconds, "I feel like I already know you," which means Grant has been talking about you more than he admitted. "Hi, I'm Dana. Don't let me overwhelm you. I'm always like this." Lena said, "Good to know," and shook her hand, and Dana looked at her with those sharp dark eyes that were their mother's eyes, that were Grant's eyes, and said, "I like her already," to Grant about Lena, while Lena was standing right there. "Dana," Grant said. "What? It's a compliment. It's also something you say about a dog you're thinking of adopting." "I don't think that about dogs. I'm very discriminating about dogs. Ask Theo." Dana took her coat off and handed it to Grant with the complete unconscious entitlement of a sibling. "Where's Sophie? I have something for her." Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs on cue, assessed the situation in 2 seconds, and descended at speed. Dana produced from her bag a book about geology that was technically for ages 8 and up, a decision she explained to Sophie as, "I looked at your level and bought for your level, not your age," which Sophie received as the deep respect it was intended to be. Dinner that night was long and loud. Dana had the family quality of full engagement. When she was with you, she was entirely with you, and she was with all three of them in ways that were individually calibrated. She talked to Sophie about the geology book and about caterpillars with equal seriousness. She talked to Lena about food and events coordination and the restaurant idea with the particular appetite of someone who genuinely wanted to know. She talked to Grant the way she always had, in the shorthand of siblings who'd argued and laughed and grown up in the same house, giving him a hard time about things that deserved it and letting other things pass without comment. After Sophie went to bed, Lena did the dishes and Dana stood next to her and dried them, and Grant sat at the table with his wine and watched his sister and Lena talk. He couldn't always hear the exact words over the water, but he could hear the tone, natural, real, the kind of conversation that doesn't have a purpose beyond itself. At some point, Dana said something and Lena laughed, and Dana laughed at the same time, that overlapping thing that happens when two people find the same thing funny at the same speed. Grant looked at his wine glass. He thought about a kitchen table in Providence, his father and his mother, the particular noise of a house where people who loved each other were in it. He hadn't thought about that in years without it having a sad edge. Tonight, it didn't. Later, after Lena had gone upstairs, Dana sat across from him with her wine and looked at him the way she had when they were teenagers, and she was working something out about him that she was going to say whether he wanted her to or not. "So," she said. "So," he said. "You're in love with her." "Dana, I'm not asking, I can see." She swirled her glass. "I'm just saying it so you know I see it. I've known you for 32 years and I've seen you in love exactly twice, and this is the third time." "Twice?" he said. "The second time ended badly, so we don't count it." She shrugged. "Twice that counted? This is the third." She looked at him. "She knows?" I told her. Dana looked slightly surprised, which for Dana was a significant thing. "And? She's getting there," he said, "on her own timeline." "And you're okay with that?" "Yes." Dana studied him. "You're different," she said. "I said it when we talked on the phone, and I want to say it in person. You're different, not just happier, though you are. Different in the way of someone who's decided to be present in their own life again." She paused. "I didn't know how much I missed that version of you until I saw it come back." He looked at his sister. "Don't make me sentimental on a Friday night, Dana." I'll make you whatever I want. I'm your sister. She finished her wine. She's good, Grant. She's really good. And she loves Sophie in a way that has nothing to do with you, which is... She stopped. That matters. You know it matters. I know. Okay. She stood up. I'm going to bed. I'm exhausted, and your house is cold, and I don't know how you people live in Connecticut. It's absurd. You grew up in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is different. She bent down and kissed the top of his head, which she hadn't done since they were children, and which she only did now when she meant something by it. I love you, she said. Be happy. Just let yourself be happy. She went upstairs. He sat alone with his wine for a while. Let yourself be happy. Like it was a permission that needed to be issued. Like he was waiting for someone to tell him the room was clear before he walked into it. He thought about that. In April, the problem arrived in the form of an article. A blog, if you could call it that. It had the thin, anonymous quality of something built to circulate rather than to say anything. Published a piece about the social circles of Ashford Heights and the surrounding area. It was the kind of thing that existed in every wealthy community, trading on names and situations and the compressed malice of people who had too much time and no accountability. Grant's name appeared in the 3rd paragraph. Lena's name appeared in the 4th. The piece described their situation with the particular ugliness of accurate information filtered through the worst possible interpretation. It named her a rival, a broke woman who appeared on his doorstep in October, and it named his net worth, and it named the fact that she was still in his house in April, and it drew the connecting line in the way that such things always did. The line that was designed to look like a conclusion while actually being an accusation. Marcus texted him at 7 in the morning. You've seen this? Grant had seen it. He'd seen it at 6:40 when Priya forwarded it with the note, you may want to be aware of this before you come in. He'd read it once, put his phone down, and gone to make coffee. He'd read it a second time and identified the specific shape of the damage. Not to him, he could absorb this. He'd had things written about him before, but to Lena. He heard her come downstairs. She had early shifts at Vantage events twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and this was a Tuesday. He turned from the counter. She came into the kitchen in work clothes, hair up, moving with the brisk morning energy of someone on a schedule. She looked at his face and stopped. What happened? She said. He handed her his phone with the article already open. She read it. He watched her read it. He watched her face go through several things in rapid succession. Recognition, then something harder, then the controlled stillness she reached for when she didn't want to show how something had landed. She handed the phone back. She went to pour her coffee. Lena, I knew something like this would happen eventually, she said. Her voice was even. This kind of thing. She stopped. It doesn't come from nowhere. Diane Yates or someone like her said something to someone who said something to someone who wrote this. Probably. And the things it says are... She paused. They're not untrue. The facts are right. I was broke. I came to your door. I've been here for 6 months. She turned around. The interpretation is wrong, but you can't fight the interpretation without... She stopped again. Without confirming all the facts by denying them, he finished. Yes. He set his phone face down on the counter. What do you want to do? She looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, what do you want to do? It's your name in it, too. I can have my lawyer send a notice to the site. I can say nothing. I can... He paused. What do you want? She was quiet for a moment, genuinely considering, not reacting, considering. I don't want you to do anything that looks like damage control, she said slowly, because damage control assumes there's damage, and I'm not... She pressed her lips together. I'm not ashamed of where I've been. You shouldn't be. I know. Her voice came out stronger. I know, and I'm not. She held his gaze. I'm angry. I'm allowed to be angry. Yes. And I'm... She stopped. Something moved across her face, something raw. I'm angry that it's true that I came here with nothing. I'm angry that people get to use that as a weapon. I'm angry that the thing that might be the best thing that's happened to me in years is something that someone else can write about, like it's... She stopped herself. Like it's what? He said. Quietly. She looked at him. Like it's a transaction, she said. Like I don't get to have something real because of where I started. The kitchen was quiet. He crossed it. Not quickly. He moved slowly, giving her time to decide if she wanted the space closed. She didn't move away. He stopped a foot from her. Listen to me, he said. I don't care about the article. I care about what you just said. He looked at her steadily. What you have here is real. What I told you in February is real. None of that changes because someone with a blog and too much time made it ugly. He paused. The only question is whether you believe that. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. I believe it, she said. Not quickly. The way you say something when you've checked it against every argument you can make and it still comes back true. Good, he said. She exhaled. She pressed her hands flat against the counter behind her, steadying herself. I'm going to be late. Go. We're not done with this conversation. I know. Go to work. She picked up her coffee and her bag. She stopped at the kitchen doorway. Grant. He looked up. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't quite seen on her before, something open and decided and a little afraid. I know what I feel. She stopped. I'm getting there. I know, he said. Okay. She left. He heard the front door close. He heard her car start. He stood in the kitchen for a while. He called his lawyer, not to send a notice, but to discuss options. He called Marcus and talked through the situation, not the romantic parts, but the public-facing mechanics of it. And Marcus said what Grant already knew. Ignore it. It dies faster without oxygen. He spent the day at the office with one part of his mind consistently elsewhere. He picked Sophie up from school at 3:15. She came out of the classroom door with a drawing, a person at a stove, identifiable as Lena by the hair, identifiable as a stove by the 4 circles on top. I drew Lena cooking, Sophie explained, handing it over. Mrs. Aldridge said to draw someone important. He looked at the drawing, at the 4 circles that were burners, at the figure with the hair. This is really good, Bug, he said. I know, Sophie said. She took his hand and they walked to the car. He taped the drawing to the refrigerator when they got home, which was where Sophie's drawings went. And it was there when Lena came home from work at 6:30, and she stopped in front of it and stood very still for a moment. Sophie drew you, Grant said. He was at the stove, actually cooking, a recipe Lena had written down for him 3 weeks ago that he'd been slowly getting right. I can see that. Her voice was slightly rough. She touched the corner of the paper. Mrs. Aldridge said to draw someone important? Sophie told me. She turned from the refrigerator. She looked at him at the stove, then at Sophie on the floor with her geology book, then back at him. I want to say something, she said. Okay. Earlier I said I was getting there. She set down her bag. She looked at him with the full directness she brought to every important thing. I'm there. He turned from the stove. I love you, she said. I've known it for a while. I was waiting until I felt solid enough to say it without being afraid. And today I realized that solid isn't something you arrive at and then stay. It's just deciding to stand. She paused. So I'm standing. She paused again. I love you. That's it. Sophie looked up from her geology book. She looked at Lena. She looked at her father. She looked back at the book. Are they doing feelings? She asked the book, in a tone of mild but resigned interest. Grant laughed. It came from somewhere deep, unguarded. He crossed the kitchen and Lena met him halfway, which was the thing she always did. Never waited at the edge, always came to meet him. And when he held her, it felt like the way weight feels when you've been carrying it so long you forgot it was heavy. And then you put it down. And you stand there surprised at how much lighter the world is. Sophie made the decisive sound of someone returning their attention to geology. You can hug later, she said. Something's burning. It was. The garlic. Grant swore under his breath. Lena laughed against his shoulder, and they pulled apart and she went to rescue the pan, and he apologized to the garlic, and Sophie watched this with the expression of someone who found adults deeply eccentric but was prepared to love them anyway. Dinner was fine. Better than fine. The garlic recovered, the pasta was good. Sophie ate without complaint and told them both at length about what she'd learned about igneous rock. They sat at the table as the evening settled into night, the kitchen warm and loud in the way of a house where people were genuinely in it together. And the drawing on the refrigerator caught the light. 4 circles. A figure with hair. Someone important. All of it, already, entirely true. The summer that followed was not a perfect summer. Grant would have been suspicious of it if it had been. There was a week in June when Sophie got a fever that ran high enough to scare both of them. Not dangerously, the pediatrician said, Just a standard summer virus doing what summer viruses do. But Grant spent 2 nights sleeping in the chair beside Sophie's bed, and Lena spent those same nights making soup that Sophie mostly didn't eat and reading to her until she fell asleep. And on the 3rd night, when the fever broke and Sophie woke up asking for cereal and her geology book, both Grant and Lena sat in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with the particular deflated relief of people who'd been braced for something and were now putting the brace down. "She's fine," Lena said. She was in Grant's old college sweatshirt, and her hair was in a knot she'd put up 2 days ago and not taken down. She looked exhausted. "She's fine," he agreed. He looked equally rough. "I kept thinking..." She stopped. "I know," he said. She looked at her hands around the cereal bowl she'd gotten for herself because she hadn't eaten since lunch. "Is it always like this? The fear?" He thought about it honestly. "It gets easier to manage," he said. "It doesn't get smaller." She looked at him. "I don't want it to get smaller," she said. "I think that's what I'm realizing." She paused. If it got smaller, that would mean something else got smaller. He understood what she meant. The fear was proportional. That was the part nobody told you about loving something, that the size of the fear was just the size of the love wearing a different face. Sophie was back at preschool by Thursday, slightly pale, completely unrepentant, carrying her geology book. There was also the Tuesday in July when Lena's former landlord, not the son, the father, the one who'd signed the eviction paperwork, showed up at Vantage Events. Not to see her specifically, he had a legitimate client reason to be there, a corporate event he was booking. But he was there and she saw him in the lobby, and he saw her, and the moment lasted about 4 seconds. She called Grant from the parking lot after. "I'm fine," she said, first thing, before he could ask. "Okay," he said. "What happened?" She told him. She described the 4 seconds. She described the way he'd looked at her. Not the guilty look she'd maybe wanted, not the ashamed look she'd imagined might happen if they ever crossed paths again. Just a flat, slightly dismissive recognition, like she was information he was filing away. "Did he say anything?" Grant asked. "No." She paused. "Neither did I. I just kept walking." Another pause. "I kept walking, and I got my coffee, and I did my job, and I'm sitting in my car now because my hands were shaking a little in the meeting after, and I didn't want anyone to see." "Are your hands still shaking?" "No." "Good." "I wanted to say something to him," she said. "I didn't. I'm not sure which was right." "I think you already know which was right." "Yeah." She exhaled. "Yeah, I do." She was quiet for a moment. "He has less power than I gave him. That's what hit me. Standing there, looking at him, I realized he's just a person. A bad one, but just a person. He doesn't have the power he had last October. I took most of it back." "You took all of it back," Grant said. She was quiet again. A longer quiet this time. The kind where something is being absorbed and filed and made part of the structure of a person. "I'm going to go back in," she said. "Okay." Grant. His name, the way she said it when she was about to say something she'd thought about. "I'm glad I called you." "Me too," he said. She went back in. She told him about it that evening over dinner, the full version, with more detail and less shaking. And Sophie listened with the selective attention of a child who understood that adults had complicated things happening and that the appropriate response was to eat your pasta and let the conversation happen around you. "Was the bad man mean to you?" Sophie asked, at a pause in the story. Lena looked at Sophie. "He was," she said. "A while ago." "What happened?" "I left," Lena said, "and I went somewhere better." Sophie considered this the way she considered most things. Seriously, from several angles. Then she nodded. "That's what you're supposed to do," she said, with the serene authority of a 4-year-old who had recently been told to leave a situation she didn't like at school and had taken the lesson to heart. "You leave and you go somewhere better." Grant looked at Lena. Lena looked at Grant. "Out of the mouths of children," Grant said. "She's not wrong," Lena said. Sophie, satisfied that the conversation had reached its correct conclusion, returned to her pasta. August came with its heavy heat, the kind Connecticut does reluctantly, and the backyard became Sophie's domain in the mornings before it got too hot. She'd moved on from caterpillars, or rather added to the caterpillar phase rather than replacing it, and was now interested in growing things. She wanted a garden. She wanted it immediately. in the specific way of a person who could not see why the gap between wanting and having needed to be so wide. Lena built her a raised bed with a YouTube tutorial and $40 of lumber on a Saturday morning while Grant was on a call he couldn't reschedule, and by the time he came outside at noon they had constructed, imperfectly, one corner slightly higher than the others, a detail Sophie had already named the lumpy side with affectionate acceptance, a planting box that was real and solid and smelled like fresh wood. Sophie stood beside it with her hands on her hips, examining it. "Now we put the dirt in?" she said. "Now we get the dirt," Lena said. She was sweaty and had a splinter in her left palm that she was trying to work out without making a thing of it. "And then what?" "And then we plant seeds and we wait." Sophie looked at the box. "How long do we wait?" "Depends on what we plant. Some things are fast, some things take all summer." "That's a long time." "It is." Lena looked at the box too. "But that's how growing works. You put the thing in the ground, you take care of it, and you wait. You can't rush the middle part." Sophie absorbed this. "Okay," she said, with the practical acceptance of someone who would spend the rest of the summer checking the box every single morning. "Let's get the dirt." Grant was standing on the back porch watching this exchange. Lena hadn't seen him come out. She was still working at the splinter, squinting at her palm in the sunlight, and Sophie was already headed toward the garage looking for a shovel with the focus of someone who had a mission. He walked down the steps. She looked up. "How'd the call go?" "Fine. How's the hand?" "Splinter. I'll get it." She held out her palm. He took her hand, looked at it, went inside, and came back with tweezers. She held very still while he worked at it, and when he got it, she said, "Thank you," and he said, "You built a garden," and she looked at the box. "Sophie built a garden," she said. "I just held the wood." He looked at the box, at the lumpy corner. "The lumpy side gives it character," he said. "That's exactly what I told her." She looked at him sideways. "We're getting better at this." "At what?" She gestured, a loose, encompassing gesture. "At the yard, at the box, at the house behind them." "This," she said. He looked at the same things she was looking at. "Yeah," he said. "We are." What happened in September was not something either of them planned, which was, in hindsight, the only way it could have happened correctly. Lena had been in contact for several months with a woman named Rosa Cheng, a commercial real estate agent who specialized in the restaurant and hospitality sector, who had responded to a speculative email Lena sent in April with enough genuine engagement to keep the conversation going. Rosa had a space. She'd been holding it in the back of her mind as something that might work for the right person. A former cafe in New Haven's East Rock neighborhood that had closed during a difficult year for independent restaurants, owned by an estate that needed to sell. 1,200 square feet, room for approximately 40 seats. A kitchen that needed work but had the bones. Rosa sent the listing on a Wednesday. Lena looked at it on her phone during a break at work and then put her phone in her bag and kept it there for the rest of the day because she knew if she kept looking at it, she would spiral into everything that was wrong with the idea before she'd given it a fair chance to be right. She showed Grant that evening. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and slid her phone across without a word and watched him look at it. He didn't say anything for a long time. He scrolled through the listing. He looked at the photos, the kitchen, the dining space, the street view. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. "Walk me through it," he said. "Tell me what you see." "The kitchen needs a serious renovation. The ventilation is wrong. The prep space is too concentrated on one side. The dining room has good bones, good light, solid floors, but everything cosmetic needs to come out and start over." She paused. "The location is actually good. East Rock is the right neighborhood. Residential, family-oriented, the kind of place where people want a reliable neighborhood restaurant rather than a destination." "What's the ask?" She told him. He looked at her. "Your savings," he said, "cover about 18% of it if I stretch, which is not enough for a bank to take seriously on its own." She said it evenly, like she'd already done the math from every angle and had arrived at the facts. "I'm not asking you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm showing you because you're part of my life, and this is a big thing I'm thinking about. I know you're not asking. I need you to know that before we talk about it." "Lena." He looked at her steadily. "I know, I hear you." He looked at the phone again. "What would a bank need to see to take the application seriously?" "A business plan, which I have most of. A track record in the industry, which I have. a cosigner or additional collateral, She stopped. Which you don't have on your own, he said. Right. But which exists? She looked at him. I'm not asking. You keep saying that because it's important that I not ask. And I keep hearing you say it. He set the phone down on the table. I'm going to say something and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Can you do that? She sat back. Go ahead. I have money, he said. More than I will ever need. More than Sophie will ever need. It sits in accounts and funds and it compounds and it does the things money does when you have enough of it that it can take care of itself. I did not earn all of that money by being smart. Some of it I earned by being in the right place at the right time, and some of it I inherited from circumstances, and some of it is just luck with a different name. He paused. I'm not offering you charity. I'm not offering you a rescue. I'm talking about whether there's a form of this that works correctly, that is an investment, a real one, with real terms, that you pay back on a real schedule, that gives you the thing you've been building toward and gives me no more stake in it than a bank would have. He looked at her. That's a different thing from what you're afraid I'm offering. I need you to know the difference. But boy, c'est autre chose. She was quiet for a long time. You've thought about this before today, she said. I've thought about it since the first legal pad, he said. I didn't say anything because it wasn't time to say it yet. She looked at the phone on the table, at the photos of the space in East Rock, the good light, the solid floors. If I take money from you and the restaurant fails, she said, it changes what we are. Yes, he said, so don't let it fail. She looked at him sharply. I'm not being glib, he said. I'm saying that you've been planning this for 2 years. You know this industry. You've cooked professionally for 8 years. You understand the economics of it better than most people who attempt it. The risk is real, and I'm not dismissing it. But the risk of trying is a different category from the risk of not trying. He paused. I'd rather be in this with you than watch you not do it. She was quiet again. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the September evening was cooling, the light shifting toward the amber that comes at the end of summer when the days are starting to let go of themselves. I need to think about it, she said. Take whatever time you need. I need to talk to Rosa and look at the space and run numbers I haven't run yet. Of course. And I need... She stopped. She looked at him. I need to be the one who decides this. Not because of you, because of me. I know, he said. That's the only version that works. She nodded. She picked up her phone. She looked at the photos one more time, and the thing on her face was not the fear she'd carried for years toward this idea. It was something else. Something that looked like reckoning. Like someone standing in front of a door they'd been circling for years and finally deciding to try the handle. She went to see the space on a Saturday in late September, with Rosa Cheng and without Grant. He stayed home with Sophie and did not call to check in because she hadn't asked him to call, and she would tell him what she needed to tell him when she came back. She was gone 3 hours. She came back and walked into the kitchen and said, "The ventilation problem is fixable. I talked to a contractor Rosa knows who does restaurant builds. It's manageable." She set her bag down. "The floors are original, they're beautiful, they just need to be refinished. The kitchen layout, if you reconfigure the prep area, I drew it out while I was there." She pulled a folded paper from her bag, a hand-drawn floor plan, revisions already in 3 colors of pen. It works. The year 1 menu fits this kitchen. It actually fits better than the kitchen I was designing for. Grant looked at the floor plan. And? She looked at him. And I want to do it. She said it the way she said things she'd fully decided on. No cushioning, no hedging. I want to do it. I'm scared and I want to do it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the floor plan and looked at it properly, turning it to read her notes in the margin. The prep area reconfigured to the right side. The service flow she'd been trying to solve for since December, finally resolved. 40 seats, the year 1 menu, neighborhood place, real. Then let's do it, he said. She closed her eyes for a second. Just a second. Then she opened them, and she was already thinking forward, already in the machinery of it. I need to call Rosa Monday. I need to finish the business plan. The market section needs work. I need to get the contractor out to the space before we move on price. I can look at the business plan this week if you want a second set of eyes on the financials. Yes, please. She looked at him. Thank you. Don't thank me. You did this. You made it possible. You made it possible, he said. I'm just here. She looked at him steadily. You've been here the whole time, she said. It was not a small thing to say, and they both understood it wasn't. The business plan came together over 3 weeks of evenings. They worked on it at the kitchen table after Sophie went to bed, Lena with her notes and her menus and the research she'd accumulated, Grant with the financial modeling and the parts of the plan that needed to speak the language of banks and investors. It was not always smooth. She had strong opinions about how the concept should be described, and he had strong opinions about what numbers needed to support it. And twice they had genuine arguments about it that went past midnight and ended not with resolution, but with both of them too tired to continue and picking it back up the next day without residue. The bank meeting was in October. 1 year, almost to the week, from the night she'd stood on his porch in the rain. She dressed carefully. Not in a way that tried to be something she wasn't, just carefully, with the specific attention of someone who understood that the way you walked into a room shaped what happened next. Grant drove her. She didn't ask him to. He simply said he'd drive her, and she said okay. In the car, she was quiet. He didn't fill it with reassurance. He'd learned that about her. She didn't want to be reassured when she was focused. She wanted to be left alone to prepare. He drove and let her be quiet, and when he pulled up in front of the bank, he said, "You know this business better than anyone in that room. Whatever they ask you, the answer is already in your head." She looked at him. "What if they say no? Then we figure out the next option." He said it practically, not dismissively. "But they're not going to say no." "You can't know that." "I know the business plan," he said. "I know who built it." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she opened the door and got out and walked into the building with the posture of someone who had been afraid of this exact room for years and had decided to walk in anyway. He waited. He went to a coffee shop across the street and worked through emails and did not check the time more than twice, which was a personal best. 2 hours and 14 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A text from Lena. They said yes. He put his phone down on the table. He looked at the coffee shop counter. A barista was steaming milk. Someone at the next table was on a video call. The ordinary Tuesday morning world going on around a moment that was not ordinary at all. He typed back, "I know." She sent back an emoji, a small yellow face that was laughing and crying at the same time, the one Sophie had taught her to use. And then nothing else. And he finished his coffee and walked back across the street, and she was standing outside the bank in the October air, and she looked like a person who had come through something significant and was not entirely sure what to do with her body now that it was over. He stopped in front of her. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it. Genuinely, the way she thought about things. "Terrified," she said. "And like something finally matches something else. Like two things that were separate are now—" She stopped, searching. "Like I'm finally in the same room as myself." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's what it feels like." She laughed. The real one. The loud one. The one that changed her face completely. Right there on the sidewalk in the October cold, a year after everything. They named the restaurant in November. Lena had 3 names she'd been turning over for weeks, and one morning she woke up and came downstairs and said, before she'd even made coffee, "Brooks." Just that. Her last name. Not a possessive, not decorated, just the word, standing on its own. Grant was at the counter. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's the one." The renovation started in December. Lena was there most days, either before or after her shifts at Vantage events, which she stayed at through the construction because she wasn't willing to burn the bridge before the new floor was solid. She brought Sophie on Saturdays in the afternoons, and Sophie walked around the empty space with great authority and offered opinions about where things should go. The contractor, a man named Pete Sorrento, who had renovated restaurants for 20 years and had the laconic authority of someone who had seen every possible thing go wrong and fixed it, observed Sophie's consultations with the expression of someone who found this entirely reasonable. "She says the bar should be on the left," Lena told him one afternoon. Pete looked at the left wall. "She's not wrong," he said. The bar went on the left. Grant came on weekends when the work was active, not to supervise. It wasn't his to supervise, he understood that. But because she wanted him there, and because watching it take shape from bones and ideas into something actual and real was something he didn't want to miss. He watched the ventilation get fixed and the floors get refinished and the kitchen take its new shape. He watched the color go on the dining room walls, a warm, Specific green that Lena had picked from a paint chip she'd been carrying in her wallet for 3 months. He watched the tables arrive, secondhand but solid, because she'd found them through a restaurant supply auction and stripped and refinished them herself over 2 weekends in Pete's parking lot. You didn't have to do them yourself, he said, watching her sand a tabletop one Saturday afternoon. I know, she said. I wanted to. She looked at the table. Every table in that restaurant, I'm going to know exactly what it looked like before. He understood. This was hers. Not in the financial way. They'd been careful about the terms, careful about the structure, and the loan agreement was real and formal and had its own document and its own schedule. But in the way that things you build with your hands belong to you differently than things you buy. The tables would carry her work in them. The walls had been chosen by her. The kitchen layout existed because she'd stood in the space and redrawn it until it was right. That was hers. That would always be hers. They had the conversation about the house in January. Sophie started it, the way Sophie started many things, not by planning to, but by saying the thing that was true. She was at breakfast, eating cereal, and she looked at Lena across the table and said, without preamble, "Lena, are you going to live here forever?" Lena looked at Grant. Grant looked at his coffee. "I don't know," Lena said to Sophie, honest in the way she always was with her. "Why?" "Because I want you to," Sophie said. She said it the way 4-year-olds say things they mean, completely, without strategy, without softening. "You've been here a long time, and it's good when you're here, and I want you to stay." Lena looked at Sophie for a long moment. Something in her face was doing something careful. "I'd like that too," she said. Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied that this constituted a binding agreement, and went back to her cereal. Lena looked at Grant. He looked back. Neither of them said anything, but the conversation was clearly not finished. They had it that night. Sophie in bed, kitchen quiet, the familiar geometry of the two of them at the table. "She's not wrong," Lena said. "No," he agreed. "I've been thinking about it." "I know." He paused. "The restaurant opens in March. I figured you'd want to get through that before anything else changed." She looked at him. "You were waiting. I was giving you room." "You do that," she said. It sounded like a thing she'd been observing for a long time. "You see when someone needs room, and you give it to them." She paused. "Most people don't know how to do that." "My father did it," he said. "He was very good at it. I learned from watching him." She was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant she was moved and was managing it. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I need to. Not because the restaurant is on your credit reference and I'm—" She stopped. "Because this is where I want to be. Because this is home." It became that without me deciding to let it, and then I decided to let it anyway. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" She looked at him. "You belong here," he said. "That's been true for a long time. I'm just glad you said it." She looked at the table. Then she looked up. "I have a condition," she said. "Tell me." "I pay rent." He started to speak. "Not as a gesture," she said. "Actual rent, actual number, actually paid, every month. I need to contribute to this household as a participant and not as—" She paused. "I need it to be real." He looked at her steadily. "That's fair? You agree?" "I agree. Name a number." She named one. He thought about it. He named a counter. She looked at the ceiling, doing math. She named a third number. He said, "Okay." "That's a negotiation," she observed. "I'm in private equity," he said. "Everything's a negotiation." She almost smiled. "Fine, we have a deal." "We have a deal," he said. He extended his hand across the table, mock formal, and she shook it, and then they were both smiling. Brooks opened on a Thursday evening in March, 15 months after Lena had stood on Grant's porch, with a worn bag and nowhere left to go. The soft opening was 40 people. Friends, people from the industry, Rosa Cheng, Pete Sorrento and his wife, Marcus Webb, and his partner, Dana and Theo, who drove down from Boston. Diane Holloway was there, seated at a corner table, wearing her best judgment face, which was her equivalent of a standing ovation. Sophie was there for the first hour, in a dress she'd picked herself and shoes that lit up when she walked, which she demonstrated to Pete Sorrento 3 times. She examined every table. She knew each one. She'd been present for the refinishing of most of them, and told Pete in detail about which tables had been the hardest to sand. The round ones, Pete confirmed. Because of the curve, Sophie said sagely. Exactly right, Pete said. Sophie looked pleased and went to find her grandmother. Lena worked the kitchen. She'd hired 2 line cooks, one named David, who'd come from a Hartford restaurant that had downsized, one named Faye, who was 24 and had more raw talent than experience, and who Lena had decided was worth the risk. She'd hired a server named Marco, who moved through a dining room like someone who'd been doing it his whole life, which he had. The kitchen was hers, organized exactly the way she'd organized it in her head for 2 years. Every station where she needed it, the flow she'd redrawn a dozen times, finally working in actual practice the way she'd hoped. Grant sat at a table near the back with Marcus and watched the room. He had a glass of wine he wasn't drinking much of. He was watching. She's going to make it work, Marcus said. Not a question. Yes, Grant said. You look... Marcus paused, finding the word. Settled. Grant looked at him. Is that an insult? It's the opposite of an insult. Marcus considered his own glass. You spent 10 years being the most unsettled person I knew. Successful, capable, competent. But there was always some part of you that was waiting for the right moment to actually show up to your own life. He looked at Grant. You're here now. You showed up. Grant was quiet for a moment. He looked at the room. At Dana laughing at something Theo said, at Sophie explaining the bar placement to his mother with her hands, at the bar on the left where Sophie had put it, at Lena visible through the kitchen window, moving between stations, talking to David about something, her hands occupied, her face entirely focused. She showed up first, Grant said, on my porch, in the rain, with nowhere to go. She showed up first and the rest of it followed. Marcus looked at him. That's a generous way to see it. It's the accurate way. The evening moved through its stages the way good evenings do. Slowly, without the sense of time passing, everyone too present in it to be watching the clock. The food was good. Not perfect. One dish came out slower than it should have, and Lena would talk about it later with the critical precision of someone who intended to fix it by Saturday, but genuinely, substantively good. Marcus had the braised short rib and was silent for a full minute after the first bite, which was its own kind of review. At the end of the evening, when most of the guests had gone and the kitchen crew was cleaning down and Marco was doing the last of the tables, Lena came out of the kitchen and sat down across from Grant. She had a dish towel over her shoulder and her hair had come partially down from where she'd put it up 6 hours ago, and she smelled like garlic and something braised, and she looked, for the first time in the 15 months he'd known her, like someone who had arrived at the place they'd been trying to reach. How did it feel? He said. She thought about it. Like I built it, she said. Like every piece of it came from somewhere real. The tables. She touched the one between them. I know this one. I refinished this one 2 Saturdays ago in Pete's parking lot, and it's here now. Someone ate dinner on it tonight. She looked at it. That doesn't get old. I don't think that gets old. It won't, he said. She looked around the room. There were 38 people in here tonight, she said. 40 seats. I was too short. Saturday, you'll be full. She looked at him. You don't know that. I know the food, he said. Saturday, you'll be full. She shook her head slightly, but she was smiling. The real one. Sophie appeared from somewhere. She'd been allowed to stay past her bedtime as a special occasion and had been making the most of it by talking to every available adult. And climbed into the chair beside Lena and leaned against her arm with the complete physical ease of someone who had been leaning against this person for a long time. Lena, Sophie said. Yeah, Bug? Can we come here every week? If you want to, I want to. Sophie looked at the table they were sitting at, the one Lena had refinished, the one someone had eaten dinner on tonight. This is a good table, she said. I know, Lena said. I know this table. Grant looked at his daughter leaning against the woman across from him. He looked at the room, the left wall bar, the warm green walls, the floors that had been bare wood 6 weeks ago and were now something else. He looked at the kitchen window, through which Pete's ventilation fix was invisible and perfect. He thought about a rainy October night and a soft knock and a figure on the porch holding a bag that was too wet to be useful anymore. He thought about a tooth under a pillow and a legal pad with a floor plan and a green dress in a room full of people who couldn't understand what they were looking at. He thought about his daughter's voice saying you leave and you go somewhere better. He thought about the hardware store in Providence and his father, who understood that the most important things you built were never the things you sold. There's a version of this story where it's about rescue, a wealthy man and a woman with nothing, and the thing he could give her. That version is tidier. It has a clearer shape. It's also wrong. What happened on Whitmore Lane was not a rescue. It was two people who had each separately hollowed themselves out in the name of being responsible and careful and not wanting too much, and who found, by accident and by showing up honestly, that the thing they'd stopped believing in was still available to them. It just required somebody to knock first. Lena knocked. That was the part that required the most courage, and it was hers, and nothing that came after diminished it. Grant opened the door. That was the part that required him to be, for one moment, something other than careful. And he'd managed it, not gracefully, not without fear, but he'd stepped back from the door and left her room, and she'd come in. Everything else was just what grew from that. On a Sunday morning in April, 6 months after Brooks opened, and on a morning that looked exactly like every other Sunday morning on Whitmore Lane, Grant came downstairs to find Sophie in her rabbit pajamas explaining something to Lena at the kitchen table. The coffee was made. Sunlight was coming through the kitchen window at the specific angle that it came in April, the angle that meant the year was tilting back toward warmth. He stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing himself. Lena was listening to Sophie with her full attention, chin in her hand, the way she always listened. Sophie was drawing something as she talked, a picture that appeared to involve the restaurant, several volcanoes, and an animal that might have been a caterpillar. And then, Sophie said, the caterpillar goes in the restaurant and orders the soup. What kind of soup? Lena asked. Sophie thought about it. Butterfly soup, she said, because the caterpillar is going to be a butterfly later and they want to practice. That makes complete sense, Lena said. I know, Sophie said. Lena looked up and saw Grant in the doorway. She didn't make a thing of it, just looked at him the way she looked at him now, the way she'd been looking at him for months, which was like someone who knew exactly where they were and was exactly where they meant to be. Coffee's ready, she said. I see that, he said. He came into the kitchen. Sophie immediately redirected her explanation to include him. He sat down. Lena poured his coffee without asking and set it where he could reach it, and the morning arranged itself around the three of them the way mornings had been arranging themselves for a while now. Without plan, without announcement, just settling into its shape. Outside, the April light was doing what April light does. Inside, someone was explaining butterfly soup to two people who had both come a very long way to sit at this table together, and neither of them was in any hurry to be anywhere else. The storm, when it finally passed, left behind something neither of them had been smart enough to plan for, which turned out to be enough, which turned out to be everything.